True Scary Stories from Texas. Story 1. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Bragg Road. Deep within the mysterious Big Thicket of East Texas lies a desolate stretch known as Bragg Road. This 8-mile stretch, shrouded in dense woods and often enveloped in fog, has long been the subject of local folklore. For decades, travelers have reported seeing strange, glowing orbs floating above the road, eerily bobbing and weaving through the trees. But the most chilling legend is that of the Phantom Hitchhiker, a ghostly figure who appears on the side of the road, desperately seeking a ride. Bill, a seasoned truck driver with years of experience navigating Texas rural routes, was familiar with the tales. He had always dismissed them as mere stories, a way for locals to scare newcomers. But one autumn night, as he was driving down Bragg Road on his way to Beaumont, his skepticism was put to the test. The night was unusually quiet, the only sound the hum of his truck's engine as it cut through the thick darkness. As he rounded a bend, his headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with his thumb extended in the universal gesture for a ride. Bill, though cautious, couldn't leave a stranded traveler alone in the middle of nowhere. He slowed down and stopped the truck. The man approached, and as he got closer, Bill noticed something unsettling. His clothes were outdated, torn, and dirty, as if he had been wandering the woods for years. But it was the man's eyes that truly unnerved him, hollow, lifeless, yet filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. The hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat without a word. As soon as the door closed, the temperature in the cab dropped drastically, and the truck's radio began to emit a low, static-filled hum. Bill tried to engage the man in conversation, asking where he was headed, but the hitchhiker remained silent, staring straight ahead. The air grew thick with tension, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over Bill. A few miles down the road, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the hitchhiker vanished. Bill glanced over to find the passenger seat empty, the door still locked from the inside. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. He pulled over, stepping out into the cold night air, but there was no trace of the mysterious figure. Only the echo of a haunting, blood-chilling laugh lingered in the air, fading into the night as quickly as it had come. Bill never drove down Bragg Road again. Story 2. The Woman in White of the Austin State Hospital. The Austin State Hospital, Texas' oldest psychiatric institution, has seen its share of suffering and despair since it opened its doors in 1861. Over the years, the hospital has housed thousands of patients, many of whom spent their final days within its walls. The spirits of True Scary Stories from Texas. Story 1. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Bragg Road. Deep within the mysterious Big Thicket of East Texas lies a desolate stretch known as Bragg Road. This 8-mile stretch, shrouded in dense woods and often enveloped in fog, has long been the subject of local folklore. For decades, travelers have reported seeing strange, glowing orbs floating above the road, eerily bobbing and weaving through the trees. But the most chilling legend is that of the Phantom Hitchhiker, a ghostly figure who appears on the side of the road, desperately seeking a ride. Bill, a seasoned truck driver with years of experience navigating Texas rural routes, was familiar with the tales. He had always dismissed them as mere stories, a way for locals to scare newcomers. But one autumn night, as he was driving down Bragg Road on his way to Beaumont, his skepticism was put to the test. The night was unusually quiet, the only sound the hum of his truck's engine as it cut through the thick darkness. As he rounded a bend, his headlights caught a figure standing by the side of the road. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with his thumb extended in the universal gesture for a ride. Bill, though cautious, couldn't leave a stranded traveler alone in the middle of nowhere. He slowed down and stopped the truck. The man approached, and as he got closer, Bill noticed something unsettling. His clothes were outdated, torn, and dirty, as if he had been wandering the woods for years. But it was the man's eyes that truly unnerved him, hollow, lifeless, yet filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. The hitchhiker climbed into the passenger seat without a word. As soon as the door closed, the temperature in the cab dropped drastically, and the truck's radio began to emit a low, static-filled hum. Bill tried to engage the man in conversation, asking where he was headed, but the hitchhiker remained silent, staring straight ahead. The air grew thick with tension, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over Bill. A few miles down the road, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the hitchhiker vanished. Bill glanced over to find the passenger seat empty, the door still locked from the inside. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled to comprehend what had just happened. He pulled over, stepping out into the cold night air, but there was no trace of the mysterious figure. Only the echo of a haunting, blood-chilling laugh lingered in the air, fading into the night as quickly as it had come. Bill never drove down Bragg Road again. Story 2. The Woman in White of the Austin State Hospital. The Austin State Hospital, Texas' oldest psychiatric institution, has seen its share of suffering and despair since it opened its doors in 1861. Over the years, the hospital has housed thousands of patients, many of whom spent their final days within its walls. The spirits of these tormented souls are said to linger, their presence felt by those who dare to enter the hospital's oldest wings. Among the numerous ghost stories that have emerged from the hospital, none is more tragic than that of the woman in white. According to legend, she was a patient in the early 1900s, committed to the hospital after a series of traumatic events left her mentally shattered. Unable to cope with her pain, she took her own life, hanging herself in one of the hospital's isolated rooms. Since then, her spirit has been trapped within the hospital, doomed to wander the halls for eternity. Those who have encountered the woman in white describe her as a tall, slender figure dressed in a flowing white gown, her face obscured by a long veil. She is often seen in the hospital's old wing, where the paint is peeling from the walls and the air is thick with the scent of decay. Her presence is usually preceded by an icy chill, and those who see her report feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and despair. Tom, a night security guard at the hospital, had heard the stories but never believed them until one fateful night. As he made his rounds through the old wing, the lights began to flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He shrugged it off as a power surge and continued on his way. But as he approached a particularly dark corridor, he saw her, a woman in white, standing at the far end of the hall, her back turned to him. Tom called out to her, thinking she was a lost visitor, but she didn't respond. He approached cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. When he was just a few feet away, the woman slowly turned to face him. What he saw made his blood run cold. Her face, partially visible through the veil, was twisted in agony, her eyes hollow and lifeless. Before he could react, she let out a low, mournful wail and began to drift toward him. Paralyzed with fear, Tom could only watch as the woman in white floated past him, her icy breath brushing against his skin. As she moved farther down the corridor, she slowly faded away, leaving only the cold, oppressive air in her wake. Tom immediately reported the incident, but his supervisors dismissed it as a figment of his imagination. Nevertheless, Tom knew what he had seen, and he never returned to that wing of the hospital again. Story 3. The Screaming Bridge of Arlington. Arlington, Texas, is home to a haunting legend that has terrified locals for generations, the tale of the Screaming Bridge. The story dates back to the 1950s when a tragic accident claimed the lives of several teenagers who were driving across a narrow, rickety bridge late one night. As the car reached the middle of the bridge, it suddenly collapsed, plunging the vehicle into the murky waters below. All of the passengers drowned, their desperate screams echoing through the night. Since that fateful night, the bridge has earned a sinister reputation. Locals say that on quiet, moonless nights, the screams of the victims can still be heard, piercing the silence and sending shivers down the spines of those nearby. The bridge itself has long since been rebuilt, but the original structure's cursed legacy endures. A group of college students, skeptical of the legend, decided to visit the bridge one Halloween night. They arrived just after midnight, armed with flashlights and cameras, ready to debunk the myth. The air was still, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. As they stood on the bridge, the students began to joke and laugh, their voices echoing across the water. But their laughter was soon cut short. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the night grew unnaturally quiet. A feeling of unease settled over the group as a faint, distant scream reached their ears. They froze, straining to listen. The scream grew louder, more desperate, as if someone was crying out for help. Then, without warning, the bridge began to tremble beneath their feet. Panic set in as the students felt ghostly hands brushing against them, pulling at their clothes, trying to drag them down into the water below. Terrified, they fled back to their cars, the screams still ringing in their ears. They swore they would never return to the Screaming Bridge, and to this day, they remain haunted by the memory of that night. Story 4. The Cursed House of Yorktown Memorial Hospital. Yorktown Memorial Hospital, located in the small town of Yorktown, Texas, is a place where the veil between the living and the dead is thin. Built in the 1950s and abandoned in the 1980s, the hospital has become a notorious hotspot for paranormal activity. The building, with its decaying walls and empty corridors, exudes an aura of malevolence that draws ghost hunters and thrill seekers from all over the country. The spirits that inhabit Yorktown Memorial are said to be those of former patients, nurses, and even a sinister presence believed to be a demon. Visitors have reported being touched, scratched, and even pushed by unseen forces. Disembodied voices echo through the halls, and shadowy figures lurk in the corners of rooms, watching intruders with malevolent intent. Jenny, a skeptic who had never believed in ghosts, decided to visit the hospital with a group of friends. They arrived just before sunset, armed with flashlights and recording equipment, eager to capture evidence of the supernatural. As they explored the hospital, they experienced the usual unsettling phenomena: cold spots, flickering lights, and faint whispers, but nothing could have prepared Jenny for what she encountered in the basement. While her friends were upstairs, Jenny ventured into the basement alone, curious to see if she could experience anything truly terrifying. The basement was dark and damp, the air heavy with the smell of mold and decay. As she walked through the narrow, crumbling corridors, she felt a growing sense of unease, as if she were being watched. Suddenly, she heard a low growl coming from the darkness ahead. She stopped, her heart pounding in her chest, and shone her flashlight in the direction of the sound. At first, she saw nothing, just the decaying remnants of the old hospital. But as she took a step forward, something caught her eye. A dark figure crawling out of the shadows on all fours, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Jenny's blood ran cold as the figure rose to its full height, towering over her. It was a man, or what had once been a man, with a twisted, grotesque face and long, sharp claws. The creature let out a guttural snarl, and Jenny turned and ran, her screams echoing through the basement as she fled back upstairs. When she reached her friends, she was pale and trembling, barely able to speak. They quickly left the hospital, vowing never to return. Jenny, once a skeptic, was now a firm believer in the paranormal. She knew that whatever had been lurking in the basement of Yorktown Memorial Hospital was not a lost soul, but something far darker, something that should never have been disturbed. Story 5. The Demon of Goatman's Bridge. Old Alton Bridge, more commonly known as Goatman's Bridge, is a historic iron truss bridge that spans Hickory Creek in Denton County, Texas. The bridge, once used by travelers to cross the creek, is now a site of urban legend and paranormal activity. The most famous tale associated with the bridge is that of the Goatman, a half-man, half-goat creature that is said to haunt the area. According to legend, the Goatman was once a successful African-American goat farmer who lived near the bridge. Enraged by his success, local clan members lynched him, hanging him from the bridge and leaving his body to rot. But when they returned to the bridge the next day, his body was gone, and the Goatman's vengeful spirit was born. It is said that he now prowls the bridge and the surrounding woods, seeking revenge on those who dare to cross his path. One night, a group of thrill-seekers decided to visit Goatman's Bridge, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous creature. They arrived at the bridge just after midnight, their nerves tingling with excitement and fear. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the area in complete darkness. As they stood on the bridge, one of them began to taunt the Goatman, daring him to show himself. At first, nothing happened. But then, the air grew thick and oppressive, and a foul smell began to permeate the area. The group heard a low, guttural growl coming from beneath the bridge. As they peered over the edge, their flashlights flickering, they saw something moving in the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes staring up at them. Panic set in as the growling grew louder, and the group realized that whatever was under the bridge was coming for them. They fled, racing back to their car, but the sense of being chased never left them. As they drove away, they saw the creature, a massive, shadowy figure with the body of a man and the head of a goat, standing in the middle of the road, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. The group never returned to Goatman's Bridge, and they warn others to stay away, lest they too encounter the vengeful spirit of the Goatman. Story 6. The Curse of the Donkey Lady. San Antonio, Texas, is home to a terrifying legend that has haunted locals for generations, the tale of the Donkey Lady. The story varies, but most versions agree that she was once a woman who lived on a farm with her husband and children. One night, a wealthy man from the city came to their home, demanding that they sell their land to him. When the family refused, the man set fire to their house, trapping the woman and her children inside. The woman survived, but her face was horribly disfigured, her features twisted into something that resembled a donkey. Consumed by rage and grief, she fled to the woods near Elm Creek, where she is said to have become a vengeful spirit, luring unsuspecting travelers to their doom. Those who have encountered the Donkey Lady describe her as a grotesque figure with the body of a woman and the face of a donkey, her eyes filled with an unquenchable hatred. She is said to wander the woods at night, her mournful brays echoing through the trees. Some say she can even be summoned by driving to the bridge over Elm Creek and calling out to her. One night, a group of friends decided to test the legend. They drove out to the bridge and parked their car, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the wind. After a few minutes of waiting, one of them called out, taunting the Donkey Lady to show herself. At first, there was only silence. But then they heard it, a low, animalistic bray, followed by the sound of something heavy moving through the brush. The air grew thick with the stench of burning flesh, and the group began to feel a rising sense of dread. Suddenly, the trees around them began to shake, and a figure emerged from the darkness. It was the Donkey Lady, her twisted, animalistic face illuminated by the car's headlights. She let out a blood-curdling scream and charged at the car, her long, clawed hands reaching out to grab them. The group barely managed to start the car and speed away, the Donkey Lady's screams echoing in their ears as they fled. They vowed never to return to the bridge, and they warn others to stay away from the cursed place, lest they too fall victim to the wrath of the Donkey Lady. Story 7. The Haunting of Hotel Galvez. Hotel Galvez, located in Galveston, Texas, is a grand, historic hotel that has welcomed guests since 1911. But behind its luxurious exterior lies a history of tragedy and loss that has given rise to numerous ghost stories. The most famous of these is the tale of Audra, a young bride who met a tragic end at the hotel. According to the legend, Audra was engaged to a sailor who was often away at sea. She would stay at Hotel Galvez, waiting for his return, and would often climb up to the rooftop to watch for his ship. One stormy night, she received word that her fiancé's ship had gone down in the Gulf of Mexico and all aboard were lost. Devastated by the news, Audra hanged herself in the hotel's turret. But the story didn't end there. Just days later, her fiancé returned to the hotel, alive and well. His ship had merely been delayed by the storm. Heartbroken and guilt-ridden, he learned of Audra's fate and left the hotel, never to return. Since then, guests and staff at Hotel Galvez have reported seeing a young woman in a white dress wandering the halls and the rooftop, her face a mask of sorrow. She is often seen near the elevator, waiting for a ride that never comes, or in the turret where she took her own life. Some say they have even felt her presence in their rooms, a cold breeze brushing against their skin, or the sensation of being washed. One guest, staying in room 501, the room closest to the turret, experienced a night of terror. She awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of sobbing coming from the direction of the turret. As she listened, the sobbing grew louder and the temperature in the room dropped. The guest pulled the covers over her head, too frightened to move. Suddenly, the sobbing stopped and the room fell silent. But then she felt it, a cold hand on her shoulder, gently shaking her awake. She opened her eyes to see a woman in a white dress standing at the foot of her bed, her eyes filled with sadness. The woman mouthed something the guest couldn't hear, and then she vanished, leaving the room as cold as a tomb. The next morning, the guest checked out of the hotel, still shaken by the encounter. She never returned to Hotel Galvez, but the story of her night in room 501 has become one of the hotel's most famous ghost tales, adding to the legend of Audra, the ghostly bride who still waits for her lost love. Story 8. The Shadow Man of Texas State University. Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas, is known for its picturesque campus and vibrant student life. But beneath the surface lies a darker history, one that has given rise to tales of paranormal activity. Among the many ghost stories associated with the university, the most chilling is that of the Shadow Man, a malevolent entity that is said to haunt the old main building. The old main building, with its Victorian Gothic architecture, is one of the oldest structures on campus. It has been the site of numerous strange occurrences, from disembodied voices to unexplained cold spots. But the most terrifying reports come from those who have encountered the Shadow Man, a tall, dark figure that appears out of nowhere and instills a deep sense of fear in those who see him. One night, a student named Sarah was working late in one of the old main classrooms, finishing up a paper due the next day. The building was quiet, the halls empty, and the only light came from the lamp on her desk. As she typed away, she suddenly felt a chill in the air, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. She brushed it off, thinking it was just her imagination. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement in the hallway. She looked up, expecting to see another student, but the hall was empty. Uneasy, she returned to her work, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Finally, she decided to pack up and leave. As she gathered her things, she saw him, a tall, shadowy figure standing in the doorway, blocking her exit. The figure had no discernible features, just a dark silhouette against the dim light of the hallway. A wave of terror washed over Sarah, and she felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. She tried to call out, but her voice caught in her throat. The Shadow Man didn't move, just stood there, watching her with unseen eyes. Desperate, Sarah grabbed her backpack and bolted for the door, pushing past the figure and sprinting down the hallway. She didn't stop running until she was outside, the cool night air filling her lungs. Sarah never returned to Old Main after dark again, and her story has become one of the many ghostly tales whispered among the students of Texas State University. The Shadow Man, it seems, is still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. Story 9. The Ghost Lights of Marfa. The small town of Marfa, Texas, is famous for its mysterious ghost lights, an unexplained phenomenon that has baffled residents and visitors alike for over a century. The lights, which appear as glowing orbs hovering above the desert, have been seen by countless witnesses, yet no one has been able to explain their origin. Some believe the lights are the spirits of Native Americans who once roamed the land, while others think they are the result of atmospheric conditions or reflections from distant car headlights. But the lights have been reported since before the advent of automobiles, leading many to believe that something supernatural is at play. One evening, a group of friends decided to drive out to the Marfa Lights viewing area to see the phenomenon for themselves. They arrived just after sunset, the sky ablaze with the colors of the setting sun. As darkness fell, they watched the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elusive lights. For a while, nothing happened, and the group began to lose hope. But then one of them spotted something, a faint, glowing orb hovering above the desert, slowly moving from side to side. As they watched, more lights appeared, flickering in and out of existence, their movements erratic and unpredictable. The group was mesmerized by the lights, but as they continued to watch, they began to feel a growing sense of unease. The lights seemed to be getting closer, moving toward them with an almost deliberate intent. The air around them grew heavy, and a low, humming sound filled their ears. Suddenly, one of the lights shot toward them at an incredible speed, passing just inches above their heads before disappearing into the night. The group panicked, jumping into their car and speeding away from the viewing area. As they drove, they could see the lights in their rearview mirror, following them for several miles before finally disappearing. To this day, the Marfa Lights remain a mystery, and those who have witnessed them are left with more questions than answers. Are they a natural phenomenon or something otherworldly? Whatever the explanation, the ghost lights of Marfa continue to captivate and terrify those who seek them out. Story 10. The Lady of the Lake at White Rock Lake. White Rock Lake, located in Dallas, Texas, is a serene and picturesque spot popular with locals for boating, fishing, and picnicking. But beneath its tranquil surface lies a dark legend, the tale of the Lady of the Lake, a ghostly figure who haunts the shores of the lake, searching for a ride home. According to the legend, the Lady of the Lake was a young woman who drowned in the lake many years ago, possibly on the night of her wedding. Her spirit, unable to find peace, is said to appear on foggy nights, standing by the side of the road near the lake, dressed in a soaking wet white gown. One night, a couple was driving along the road that circles the lake when they saw her, a pale, slender woman standing by the water's edge, her dress clinging to her body, her hair wet and matted. Concerned, they stopped the car and asked if she needed help. The woman silently nodded and climbed into the backseat, her cold, wet body sending shivers down their spines. As they drove, the couple asked her where she needed to go, but she remained silent, staring out the window with a distant, haunted expression. When they reached the address she had pointed to, they turned around to find the backseat empty, water dripping onto the seat where she had been sitting. Confused and frightened, the couple knocked on the door of the house, hoping to find some explanation. An elderly woman answered, and when they told her what had happened, she sighed and invited them in. She explained that the Lady of the Lake was her daughter, who had drowned in the lake years ago on her wedding night. Many had reported seeing her ghost, still trying to find her way home. The couple, shaken by the experience, left the house and never returned to White Rock Lake after dark. The Lady of the Lake continues to be one of Dallas' most enduring ghost stories, a reminder of the tragic fate of a young bride whose spirit still lingers by the water. Story 11. The Crying Girl of the Alamo. The Alamo, one of the most historic and iconic landmarks in Texas, is also one of the most haunted. The site of a brutal and bloody battle during the Texas Revolution, the Alamo is said to be home to the spirits of those who lost their lives there, their souls forever tied to the hallowed ground. Among the many ghost stories associated with the Alamo, one of the most poignant is that of the Crying Girl. According to legend, she was a young girl who lived at the Alamo during the siege, separated from her family and terrified of the violence surrounding her. When the battle was over, her lifeless body was found among the fallen, her face streaked with tears. Since then, visitors to the Alamo have reported hearing the faint sound of a child crying, especially in the early morning hours when the site is quiet and still. Some have even seen her, a small, pale figure in a tattered dress, wandering the grounds with tears in her eyes, searching for her family. One evening, a security guard was making his rounds when he heard the unmistakable sound of a child crying. The noise seemed to be coming from one of the old rooms where the battle had raged centuries before. The guard, thinking it was just his imagination, continued on his way, but the crying grew louder, more desperate. He followed the sound to the room where the girl had supposedly been found, and there she was, a small figure huddled in the corner, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The guard called out to her, but she didn't respond. As he approached, she slowly lifted her head, revealing a tear-streaked face and hollow, empty eyes. Before he could react, the girl let out a mournful wail and vanished into thin air, leaving the room cold and silent. The guard, shaken by the experience, quickly left the Alamo and never returned after dark. The story of the Crying Girl has become one of the Alamo's most enduring ghost tales, a reminder of the tragedy that unfolded on those sacred grounds. Story 12. The Ghosts of Presidio La Bahia. Presidio La Bahia, located in Goliad, Texas, is a historic Spanish fort that played a significant role in the Texas Revolution. The fort was the site of the Goliad Massacre, where over 300 Texian soldiers were executed by Mexican forces. The bloodshed and suffering that took place within the walls of Presidio La Bahia have left a lasting mark, and many believe the spirits of the fallen soldiers still haunt the fort. Visitors to the fort have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from shadowy figures to disembodied voices. The most common sighting is that of a lone soldier dressed in a ragged uniform, patrolling the walls of the fort. He is often seen at dusk, his face a mask of sorrow as he walks the grounds, his footsteps echoing in the silence. One night, a group of history enthusiasts decided to spend the night at the fort, hoping to experience some of the legendary hauntings. They set up camp in one of the old barracks, their flashlights casting long shadows on the crumbling walls. As the night wore on, they began to hear strange noises, footsteps, whispers, and the sound of metal clanking against stone. Suddenly, one of them saw him, a soldier standing in the doorway, his uniform torn and blood-stained, his eyes hollow and lifeless. The soldier stared at them for a moment, then turned and walked out into the courtyard. The group, too frightened to move, watched as the soldier continued his patrol, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, the group left the fort, still shaken by what they had seen. They knew that the spirits of Presidio La Bahia were still there, guarding the fort as they had done in life, unable to find peace after the horrors of the massacre. The ghosts of Presidio La Bahia remain a powerful reminder of the fort's bloody history, their restless souls forever tied to the place where they met their tragic end. Story 13. The Haunted Tracks of San Antonio. In San Antonio, there is a set of railroad tracks that has become famous for a strange and eerie phenomenon. According to local legend, a school bus full of children was struck by a train at the crossing many years ago, killing everyone on board. The spirits of the children, unable to move on, are said to haunt the tracks, protecting others from meeting the same fate. The legend goes that if you stop your car on the tracks and put it in neutral, the spirits of the children will push your car to safety, up and over the tracks. Some people have even reported seeing tiny handprints on their car windows after experiencing the phenomenon. One night, a group of friends decided to test the legend. They drove out to the tracks, turned off the car, and put it in neutral. As they waited, they felt a sudden jolt, as if something had pushed the car forward. Slowly, the car began to move, rolling uphill and over the tracks. The friends, stunned by what was happening, could only watch in amazement as their car was carried to safety. When they reached the other side, they got out to inspect the car. To their shock, they found small handprints on the back of the car, as if tiny hands had been pushing it from behind. The friends quickly left the tracks, convinced that the spirits of the children were real and still watching over the crossing. The haunted tracks of San Antonio have become a popular destination for thrill seekers and paranormal enthusiasts, all eager to experience the strange phenomenon for themselves. Whether it's the spirits of the children or something else entirely, one thing is certain: there is something very unusual about those tracks. Story 14. The Ghost of Driscoll Hotel. The Driscoll Hotel in Austin, Texas, is one of the most luxurious and historic hotels in the state. Built in 1886, the hotel has hosted numerous celebrities, politicians, and even presidents. But behind its opulent facade lies a history of tragedy and loss, leading many to believe that the hotel is haunted. One of the most famous ghost stories associated with the Driscoll is that of a young girl who died tragically at the hotel. According to the legend, the girl was the daughter of a wealthy cattle baron who was staying at the hotel. One day, while playing with a ball on the grand staircase, the girl slipped and fell to her death. Her spirit is said to still linger in the hotel, playing with her ball and wandering the halls. Guests have reported hearing the sound of a ball bouncing down the staircase, only to find no one there. Others have seen the ghostly figure of a young girl in a white dress, her laughter echoing through the empty corridors. One guest, staying in a room near the staircase, awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of a child giggling. When she opened her eyes, she saw the girl standing at the foot of her bed, her ball in hand, before disappearing into the darkness. The ghost of the young girl is just one of many spirits said to haunt the Driscoll Hotel. Other stories include the ghost of a former senator who died in the hotel, as well as the spirit of a bride who took her own life in one of the suites. The Driscoll Hotel remains a popular destination for those interested in the paranormal, its rich history and ghostly inhabitants continuing to intrigue and terrify visitors. Story 15. The Curse of Spaghetti Warehouse. The Spaghetti Warehouse in Houston, Texas, is known for its delicious Italian food and historic charm. But the restaurant is also famous for something far more sinister: the ghostly presence of a woman who is said to haunt the building. The story goes that the building, which was once a pharmacy, was the site of a tragic accident. A pharmacist fell to his death down an open elevator shaft, leaving behind a grieving widow. The widow, heartbroken and unable to cope with her loss, is said to have died of a broken heart. Her spirit, unable to find peace, now haunts the Spaghetti Warehouse, searching for her lost love. Employees and patrons have reported a wide range of paranormal activity at the restaurant. Glasses have been known to move on their own, and cold spots have been felt throughout the building. But the most common sighting is that of a woman in a long dress, wandering the upper floors of the building. One night, a waitress was closing up the restaurant when she heard the sound of footsteps coming from the second floor. Thinking it was one of her co-workers, she called out, but no one responded. She climbed the stairs, only to find the upper floor empty. As she turned to leave, she saw her, a woman in a long dark dress, standing by the window, staring out into the night. The waitress froze, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman turned to face her, and for a moment their eyes met. The waitress could feel the sadness radiating from the woman, a deep, overwhelming sorrow that seemed to fill the room. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman vanished, leaving the waitress alone in the darkened room. The curse of the spaghetti warehouse has become one of Houston's most famous ghost stories, a chilling reminder that the past is never truly gone. The spirit of the grieving widow still lingers, her sorrow echoing through the halls of the old building, a testament to the tragedy that once took place there. Story 16. The Haunted Cemetery of Martha's Chapel. Martha's Chapel Cemetery, located in Walker County, Texas, is a small, secluded graveyard surrounded by dense woods. The cemetery, with its weathered tombstones and overgrown paths, is the final resting place of many early settlers and their families. But the cemetery is also known for something far more sinister, the ghostly apparitions and strange occurrences that have been reported there for years. Visitors to the cemetery have reported seeing shadowy figures moving among the tombstones, and some have even heard disembodied voices calling out to them from the darkness. The most famous ghost associated with Martha's Chapel is that of a young girl who is said to roam the cemetery at night, her mournful cries echoing through the trees. One night, a group of teenagers decided to visit the cemetery, drawn by the stories of ghostly activity. They arrived just after midnight, their flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. As they explored the cemetery, they began to feel a growing sense of unease. The air was thick and heavy, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps. Suddenly, one of them saw something moving in the distance, a small, pale figure weaving between the tombstones. They called out, but the figure didn't respond. As they got closer, they realized it was a young girl, dressed in a white gown, her face hidden by her long dark hair. She seemed to be searching for something, her movements slow and deliberate. The group watched in silence as the girl moved through the cemetery, her form almost translucent in the moonlight. But as they approached, she suddenly stopped and turned to face them. Her eyes were hollow and empty, her face twisted in a mask of sorrow. The group, terrified, turned and ran, not stopping until they were back at their car. To this day, the ghost of the young girl is said to haunt Martha's Chapel Cemetery, her restless spirit unable to find peace. The cemetery remains a popular destination for ghost hunters and thrill seekers, all hoping to catch a glimpse of the tragic figure who still roams the grounds. Story 17. The Ghost of Jefferson Hotel. The Jefferson Hotel in Jefferson, Texas, is a historic hotel with a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in the state. Built in the 1850s, the hotel has hosted many guests over the years, but some of them never left. The hotel is said to be home to several spirits, each with their own story to tell. The most famous ghost associated with the Jefferson Hotel is that of a young woman named Lydia Grimes. According to legend, Lydia was staying at the hotel with her fiancé when she discovered that he had been unfaithful. Devastated, she took her own life in one of the hotel rooms. Her spirit is said to still linger in the hotel, unable to move on. Guests staying at the Jefferson Hotel have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from cold spots to disembodied voices. But the most common sighting is that of Lydia herself, dressed in a long flowing gown, wandering the halls of the hotel. She is often seen near the room where she died, her face a mask of sorrow. One guest, staying in that very room, awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of soft crying. As she listened, the crying grew louder, and the temperature in the room dropped. She turned on the light and saw her, a young woman in a white gown, standing at the foot of the bed, her face streaked with tears. The guest, too frightened to move, watched as the woman slowly walked toward the door and disappeared into the hallway. The next morning, she checked out of the hotel, still shaken by the experience. The story of Lydia Grimes has become one of the most famous ghost tales associated with the Jefferson Hotel, adding to its reputation as one of the most haunted places in Texas. Story 18. The Curse of the Blue Light Cemetery. Blue Light Cemetery, Located in Lancaster, Texas, is a small, isolated graveyard that has earned a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in the state. The cemetery is named for the strange blue light that is said to appear over the graves at night, a phenomenon that has never been fully explained. According to legend, the blue light is the spirit of a woman who was buried in the cemetery many years ago. The woman, who was accused of being a witch, was hanged by a mob and buried in an unmarked grave. Her spirit, unable to find peace, is said to haunt the cemetery, her presence marked by the eerie blue light. One night, a group of friends decided to visit the cemetery, drawn by the stories of the mysterious blue light. They arrived just before midnight, their flashlights casting long shadows on the ground. As they explored the cemetery, they began to feel a growing sense of unease. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the silence was oppressive. Suddenly, one of them saw it, a faint blue light hovering over one of the graves. The light grew brighter, casting an eerie glow on the surrounding tombstones. As they watched, the light began to move, weaving between the graves as if searching for something. The group, terrified by what they were seeing, decided to leave, but as they turned to go, the light suddenly shot toward them, moving faster than they could react. They ran for their car, the blue light following them until they reached the cemetery gates. As they sped away, they could still see the light in their rearview mirror, slowly fading into the night. The curse of Blue Light Cemetery has become one of the most famous ghost stories in Texas, a chilling reminder that the past is never truly gone. The spirit of the woman who was buried there still lingers, her restless soul marked by the strange blue light that haunts the cemetery. Story 19. The Haunting of Baker Hotel. The Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells, Texas, is a grand, historic hotel that has stood the test of time. But behind its elegant facade lies a history of tragedy and loss, leading many to believe that the hotel is haunted. The most famous ghost associated with the Baker Hotel is that of a woman who is said to have died there under mysterious circumstances. According to legend, the woman was a mistress of one of the hotel's wealthy guests. When their affair was discovered, she took her own life in one of the hotel rooms. Her spirit is said to still linger in the hotel, unable to move on. Guests and staff at the Baker Hotel have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from cold spots to disembodied voices. But the most common sighting is that of the woman herself, dressed in a long flowing gown, wandering the halls of the hotel. She is often seen near the room where she died, her face a mask of sorrow. One guest, staying in that very room, awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of soft crying. As he listened, the crying grew louder, and the temperature in the room dropped. He turned on the light and saw her, a woman in a white gown, standing at the foot of the bed, her face streaked with tears. The guest, too frightened to move, watched as the woman slowly walked toward the door and disappeared into the hallway. The next morning, he checked out of the hotel, still shaken by the experience. The story of the woman who haunts the Baker Hotel has become one of the most famous ghost tales associated with the hotel, adding to its reputation as one of the most haunted places in Texas. Story 20. The Phantom Bride of Victoria's Black Swan Inn. Victoria's Black Swan Inn, located in San Antonio, Texas, is a historic inn with a dark and haunted past. The inn, which was once the site of a bloody battle during the Texas Revolution, is said to be home to several spirits, including that of a phantom bride. According to legend, the bride was a young woman who was to be married at the inn many years ago. But on the day of her wedding, tragedy struck. Her fiancé was killed in a duel, leaving her heartbroken and alone. Unable to cope with her loss, the bride took her own life in one of the inn's rooms. Her spirit is said to still linger at the inn, dressed in her wedding gown, waiting for the groom who will never come. Guests and staff at Victoria's Black Swan Inn have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from cold spots to disembodied voices. But the most common sighting is that of the bride herself, wandering the halls of the inn, her face a mask of sorrow. One guest, staying in the room where the bride died, awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of soft crying. As he listened, the crying grew louder, and the temperature in the room dropped. He turned on the light and saw her, a young woman in a white wedding gown, standing at the foot of the bed, her face streaked with tears. The guest, too frightened to move, watched as the bride slowly walked toward the door and disappeared into the hallway. The next morning, he checked out of the inn, still shaken by the experience. The story of the Phantom Bride has become one of the most famous ghost tales associated with Victoria's Black Swan Inn, adding to its reputation as one of the most haunted places in Texas. Story 21. The Restless Spirits of Dead Man's Hole. Dead Man's Hole, located near Marble Falls, Texas, is a deep, natural sinkhole that has a dark and bloody history. During the Civil War, it became a notorious execution site for Union sympathizers and others deemed enemies of the Confederacy. These unfortunate souls were thrown into the hole, their bodies never to be recovered. Today, it is said that their restless spirits still haunt the area, unable to find peace after their violent deaths. Visitors to Dead Man's Hole have reported strange occurrences such as eerie whispers, cold spots, and the feeling of being watched. Some have even seen shadowy figures lurking near the entrance to the hole, their forms barely visible in the dim light. One night, a group of ghost hunters decided to investigate the site, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal. As they approached the edge of the sinkhole, they felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something was warning them to stay away. Ignoring the feeling, they set up their equipment and began their investigation. But as the night wore on, things took a terrifying turn. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the sound of distant screams echoed up from the depths of the hole. One of the investigators saw a figure emerging from the darkness, a spectral form of a man, his face twisted in pain and anger. The group, terrified, quickly packed up and left the area, vowing never to return. They knew that the spirits of Dead Man's Hole were still there, their restless souls forever trapped in the place where they met their untimely deaths. Story 22. The Legend of the Headless Horseman of El Muerto. The Legend of El Muerto, or the Headless Horseman of South Texas, is a tale that has been passed down through generations. According to the story, El Muerto was once a notorious bandit named Vidal, who terrorized the region with his ruthless gang. After stealing cattle from a local rancher, Vidal was captured and executed by having his head chopped off. His body was then tied to a horse, and his severed head was placed in his hands as a warning to other outlaws. But instead of serving as a deterrent, Vidal's decapitated body became the source of a terrifying legend. For weeks, the horse roamed the countryside with Vidal's headless corpse still tied to it. Ranchers and travelers reported seeing the grisly sight, the headless horseman galloping across the plains, his lifeless eyes staring out from his severed head. Even after the body was finally removed from the horse and buried, the legend persisted. It is said that Vidal's restless spirit continues to haunt the region, his headless form riding through the night, searching for his missing head. Those who have encountered El Muerto report feeling an intense sense of fear and dread, as if the very air around them is charged with malevolent energy. One evening, a group of cowboys was driving cattle across the plains when they heard the sound of galloping hooves in the distance. As the sound grew closer, they saw him, a headless figure on horseback, his body swaying with the motion of the horse. The cowboys froze in terror as the headless horseman rode past them, his head held high in his hands. The next morning, they'd found the cattle scattered and spooked, as if they had encountered something truly terrifying in the night. The legend of El Muerto continues to be a source of fear and fascination in South Texas, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and some spirits are destined to ride forever. Story 23. The Haunted Alamo Quarry Market. The Alamo Quarry Market in San Antonio, Texas, is a popular shopping and entertainment destination, but few know about its haunted past. Before it became a bustling marketplace, the site was home to the Alamo Cement Company, where many workers toiled and, in some cases, met tragic ends. The old smokestacks that still stand today are reminders of the site's industrial history, and it's said that the spirits of the workers who died there still haunt the area. Shoppers and employees have reported strange occurrences at the Alamo Quarry Market, from unexplained noises to shadowy figures seen out of the corner of the eye. Some have even claimed to hear the sound of heavy machinery and the voices of men shouting orders, as if the cement plant was still in operation. One night, a security guard was patrolling the area near the old smokestacks when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned around, expecting to see one of his colleagues, but the path was empty. As he continued his patrol, the footsteps grew louder, as if someone were following him. The guard quickened his pace, but the sound kept pace with him, echoing in the silence of the night. Suddenly, the guard felt a cold breeze brush past him, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw a figure, an old man in dirty overalls, his face grim and determined. The figure walked right past him, disappearing into the shadows of the smokestacks. The guard, too shaken to continue his patrol, quickly returned to his post and reported the incident. He never walked that path alone again. The haunted history of the Alamo Quarry Market serves as a reminder that even in the midst of modern life, the spirits of the past can still linger, their presence felt by those who are attuned to the paranormal. Story 24. The Curse of the Dripping Springs Cemetery. Dripping Springs, Texas is a small town with a big secret, a cursed cemetery that has been the source of strange and terrifying events for years. The Dripping Springs Cemetery is said to be haunted by the spirits of those who were buried there under tragic or mysterious circumstances. The most infamous of these spirits is that of a young woman who died under mysterious circumstances in the early 1900s. According to local legend, the woman was the daughter of a wealthy landowner who fell in love with a man her father disapproved of. When she refused to end the relationship, her father had the man killed and arranged for his daughter to be sent away. Heartbroken, the woman took her own life, and her spirit is said to haunt the cemetery, searching for her lost love. Visitors to the cemetery have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a woman in a long dress wandering among the tombstones. Some have even heard her crying, the sound echoing through the trees. One night, a group of teenagers decided to visit the cemetery, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous ghost. They arrived just after midnight, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the ground. As they explored the cemetery, they began to feel a growing sense of unease. The air was thick and heavy, and the sound of the wind in the trees was almost deafening. Suddenly, one of the teens saw her, a woman in a long flowing dress, standing by a grave. Her face was pale and expressionless, her eyes filled with sorrow. The group watched in silence as the woman began to move, slowly walking toward them. They could hear her sobbing, the sound growing louder with each step. Terrified, the teens turned and ran, not stopping until they were back at their car. As they drove away, they looked back and saw the woman standing at the edge of the cemetery, watching them leave. The curse of the Dripping Springs Cemetery continues to be a source of fear and fascination for those who dare to visit. The spirit of the young woman still haunts the cemetery, her sorrow and despair a constant reminder of the tragedy that befell her. Story 25. The Ghost of the Baker's Street Pub. Baker's Street Pub in Houston, Texas, is a popular spot for locals and tourists alike, known for its lively atmosphere and British-inspired decor. But the pub is also known for something far more sinister, the ghostly presence of a former patron who is said to haunt the establishment. The story goes that the pub was once the site of a gruesome murder. A man was stabbed to death during a bar fight, and his spirit has been unable to find peace ever since. Patrons and staff have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from cold spots to the sound of disembodied voices. But the most common sighting is that of a man in a dark coat, sitting at the bar, nursing a drink. One night, a bartender was closing up the pub when she noticed a man sitting at the far end of the bar. He was dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by the shadows. Thinking he was a late-night straggler, she approached him and asked if he needed anything. The man didn't respond, just sat there, staring into his drink. The bartender, feeling uneasy, turned to grab a glass from the shelf. When she turned back, the man was gone, his stool empty. The only sign that he had ever been there was the half-empty glass on the bar. The bartender, shaken by the experience, quickly finished her closing duties and left the pub, still wondering if she had imagined the whole thing. The ghost of Baker's Street Pub has become one of Houston's most famous ghost stories, a chilling reminder that the past is never truly gone. The spirit of the man who met a violent end still lingers in the pub, his presence felt by those who work and drink there, a silent witness to the tragedy that took place so many years ago. Story 26. The Spirits of Spone Hospital. Spone Hospital in Corpus Christi, Texas, is one of the oldest hospitals in the state, with a history that dates back to the early 1900s. Over the years, the hospital has seen countless patients pass through its doors, some of whom never left. The spirits of those who died within its walls are said to haunt the hospital, their restless souls unable to find peace. Staff and visitors alike have reported a wide range of paranormal activity at Spone Hospital, from cold spots to the sound of disembodied voices. But the most chilling reports involve the sighting of ghostly figures wandering the halls. One of the most famous spirits is that of a nurse who died in a tragic accident many years ago. She is often seen in the old wing of the hospital, still tending to patients in the afterlife. One night, a young nurse was working the night shift in the old wing when she heard the sound of footsteps coming down the hallway. Thinking it was one of her colleagues, she called out, but no one responded. The footsteps continued, growing louder and more distinct. The nurse, feeling uneasy, walked to the nurse's station to see who it was. As she rounded the corner, she saw her, a nurse in an old-fashioned uniform, her face pale and expressionless. The ghostly nurse walked right past her, not acknowledging her presence, and disappeared into one of the patient rooms. The young nurse, too frightened to follow, quickly returned to her station and refused to leave until her shift was over. The spirit of the nurse is just one of many ghosts said to haunt Spone Hospital. The building's long history and the countless lives that have passed through its doors have left a lasting mark, one that continues to be felt by those who work there. Story 27. The Devil's Backbone. The Devil's Backbone is a winding, treacherous stretch of road in the Texas Hill Country, known for its stunning views and dangerous curves. But the road is also infamous for something far more sinister: the numerous ghost stories and paranormal experiences associated with it. The area is said to be haunted by the spirits of Native Americans, Confederate soldiers, and even outlaws who met their end on the rugged terrain. One of the most famous tales is that of the ghostly apparitions that appear along the road, particularly on foggy nights. Travelers have reported seeing shadowy figures standing by the side of the road, only to disappear as they approach. Others have heard the sound of phantom hoofbeats, as if a group of riders is galloping through the night. One evening, a man was driving along the Devil's Backbone on his way home from work. As he navigated the winding road, he noticed a figure standing in the distance, shrouded in mist. As he got closer, he realized it was a man dressed in old-fashioned clothing, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. The man raised his hand as if to signal for a ride, but as the driver slowed down, the figure vanished into thin air. Shaken by the experience, the man continued on his way, but the sense of unease lingered. He later learned that the area where he had seen the figure was the site of an old stagecoach robbery where several travelers had been killed. The ghostly figure he encountered was believed to be one of the victims, still searching for help on a lonely stretch of road. The Devil's Backbone remains one of Texas' most haunted locations, its dark history and eerie atmosphere making it a place of both beauty and terror. Story 28. The Cursed Church of Terlingua. Terlingua, Texas, is a small, remote town near the Mexican border, known for its ghost town and rugged landscape. But it's also known for something far more unsettling: the cursed church that sits on the outskirts of town. The church, built in the early 1900s, was the site of a tragic event that left a dark stain on its history. According to local legend, a priest who served at the church was accused of committing a terrible crime. Fearing for his life, he took refuge in the church, but an angry mob stormed the building and hanged him from the rafters. The priest's spirit is said to still haunt the church, seeking revenge on those who wronged him. Visitors to the church have reported strange occurrences, from the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty building to the sight of shadowy figures moving in the corners of the room. Some have even claimed to see the ghostly figure of the priest hanging from the rafters, his face twisted in anger and sorrow. One night, a group of friends decided to visit the church, curious to see if the stories were true. As they entered the dark, abandoned building, they immediately felt a heavy, oppressive presence. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the silence was deafening. As they explored the church, they began to hear strange noises, the sound of footsteps, the creaking of the rafters, and the distant echo of a man's voice. Suddenly, one of them saw it, a dark figure hanging from the ceiling, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The group, terrified, fled the church, not stopping until they were far away. The cursed church of Terlingua remains a place of fear and fascination, its dark history and haunted reputation drawing those brave enough to explore its secrets. Story 29. The Phantom of Texas Theater. The Texas Theater in Dallas, Texas, is famous for being the location where Lee Harvey Oswald, the alleged assassin of President John F. Kennedy, was captured. But the theater is also known for something far more eerie: the ghostly figure that is said to haunt its halls. According to legend, the phantom is the spirit of a man who died in the theater many years ago. He is often seen sitting in the balcony, watching the screen with a distant, haunted expression. Some have even claimed to see him walking through the theater, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. One evening, a projectionist was working late in the theater, preparing for the next day's show. As he went about his duties, he noticed a man sitting in the balcony, dressed in an old-fashioned suit. Thinking it was a straggler from the last show, the projectionist called out to him, but the man didn't respond. The projectionist climbed the stairs to the balcony, but when he reached the top, the man was gone. Confused, he searched the area, but there was no sign of the mysterious figure. As he turned to leave, he felt a cold breeze brush past him, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man again, standing at the edge of the balcony, staring down at him with a blank expression. The projectionist, now thoroughly spooked, quickly left the theater, not daring to look back. The Phantom of Texas Theater remains one of Dallas' most famous ghost stories, a chilling reminder that the past can still linger in the most unexpected places. Story 30. The Spirits of Yorktown Memorial Hospital. Yorktown Memorial Hospital in Yorktown, Texas, is one of the most haunted places in the state, known for its dark history and the numerous spirits said to inhabit its halls. Built in the 1950s, the hospital was originally run by the Felician Sisters, a Catholic order of nuns, and served as a facility for the terminally ill and those in need of long-term care. Over the years, many patients died within its walls, and some say their spirits never left. Visitors and paranormal investigators have reported a wide range of supernatural activity at Yorktown Memorial Hospital, from cold spots and disembodied voices to shadowy figures and even physical attacks. One of the most infamous spirits Candy Lady is that unraveling the terrifying Texas legend. Origins of the legend. The legend of the Candy Lady is believed to have originated in the back and found 3 long red scratches running down his spine, still fresh and bleeding. Terrified, they decided to leave the hospital, but as they made their way to the exit, they'd heard the sound of a man laughing, a low, menacing chuckle that echoed through the empty halls. Yorktown Memorial Hospital remains a hotspot for paranormal activity, its dark history and numerous deaths making it a place of fear and fascination for those who dare to explore its haunted halls. Story 31. The Ghosts of the Old Lavaca County Jail. The Old Lavaca County Jail in Hallettsville, Texas, is a historic building with a dark and haunted past. Built in the late 1800s, the jail housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the region, many of whom met a violent end within its walls. The spirits of these men are said to still haunt the jail, their restless souls unable to move on. Visitors to the Old Lavaca County Jail have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from cold spots and strange noises to the sighting of ghostly figures. One of the most infamous spirits is that of a former inmate who was executed in the jail. His ghost is said to linger in his old cell, his presence marked by the sound of chains rattling and the feeling of intense despair. One night, a group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night in the jail, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. As they explored the building, they encountered several strange occurrences, including the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty corridors and the feeling of being watched. But the most terrifying experience came when they entered the old death row cell. As they set up their equipment, one of the investigators felt a cold breeze brush past him, followed by the sound of chains rattling. He turned around and saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the cell, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. The figure slowly moved toward him, its chains clanking with each step. The group, too frightened to stay, quickly packed up and left the jail. As they drove away, they could still hear the sound of chains rattling in the distance, a chilling reminder of the spirits that still haunt the Old Lavaca County Jail. The jail remains one of Texas' most haunted locations, its dark history and ghostly inhabitants making it a place of both fear and fascination. Story 32. The Witch of Caddo Lake. Caddo Lake, located on the Texas-Louisiana border, is a sprawling, mysterious swamp filled with cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The lake, with its dark, murky waters and eerie atmosphere, has long been the source of ghost stories and legends. One of the most chilling tales is that of the Witch of Caddo Lake, a vengeful spirit said to haunt the area. According to local legend, the witch was a woman who lived in the area during the 19th century. Accused of practicing dark magic, she was shunned by the local community and eventually murdered by a mob who believed she had cursed their land. Her body was thrown into the lake, and since then, her spirit has been unable to find peace. She is said to roam the waters, seeking revenge on those who wronged her. Fishermen and boaters have reported seeing a ghostly figure gliding across the lake, her long dark hair flowing behind her. Some have even claimed to hear her voice whispering in the wind, cursing those who dare to venture too close to her resting place. One night, a group of friends decided to camp by the lake, unaware of the legend that surrounded it. As they sat around the campfire, the wind began to pick up and the air grew cold. Suddenly, they heard a woman's voice, low and menacing, coming from the direction of the water. The friends looked out across the lake and saw her, a pale figure standing on the surface of the water, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Terrified, the group quickly packed up and left, but as they drove away, they could still hear the witch's voice cursing them, warning them never to return. The legend of the Witch of Caddo Lake continues to haunt those who live near its dark waters, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the Texas swamps. Story 33. The Ghost of the Stagecoach Inn. The Stagecoach Inn in Salado, Texas, is one of the oldest operating hotels in the state, with a history that dates back to the mid-1800s. The inn has hosted many famous guests over the years, but it is also known for something far more eerie: the ghostly presence that is said to haunt its halls. According to legend, the ghost is that of a woman who died at the inn many years ago. She was a traveler passing through town when she fell ill and was unable to continue her journey. Despite the efforts of the inn staff, she passed away in one of the guest rooms, and her spirit has remained at the inn ever since. Guests and staff at the Stagecoach Inn have reported a wide range of paranormal activity, from unexplained cold spots to the sound of disembodied voices. The ghost is often seen in one of the older rooms, dressed in a long flowing gown, her expression one of sadness and longing. One evening, a couple staying at the inn was awoken by the sound of soft footsteps outside their room. Thinking it was a staff member, the husband got up to check, but when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. As he turned to go back to bed, he saw her, a woman in a long white gown, standing at the end of the hall, her eyes fixed on him. The woman slowly turned and walked down the hall, disappearing through a closed door. The husband, too frightened to follow, quickly returned to his room and locked the door. The couple checked out the next morning, still shaken by the encounter. The ghost of the Stagecoach Inn remains one of Salado's most famous legends, a reminder that the past is never truly gone, and some spirits are destined to linger in the places they once called home. Story 34. The Phantom Truck of Route 666. Route 666, also known as the Devil's Highway, is a notorious stretch of road that runs through Texas and New Mexico. The highway has long been associated with strange and terrifying events, earning its ominous nickname. One of the most infamous legends is that of the Phantom Truck, a ghostly vehicle said to terrorize travelers who venture onto the road at night. According to the legend, the Phantom Truck is an old, rusted semi-truck that appears out of nowhere, barreling down the highway at breakneck speed. The truck's headlights are blinding, and its horn blares a deafening roar as it bears down on unsuspecting drivers. Those who encounter the Phantom Truck report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the truck is trying to run them off the road. One night, a man was driving down Route 666 on his way to visit family in Texas. The road was dark and deserted, with only the occasional flicker of a distant streetlight to break the monotony. As he drove, he noticed a pair of headlights in his rearview mirror, rapidly gaining on him. The lights were unnaturally bright, and the roar of an engine filled the air. The man tried to speed up, but the truck was relentless, its horn blaring as it drew closer. Just as he thought the truck was about to crash into him, it suddenly swerved off the road and disappeared into the desert, leaving only the echo of its horn behind. The man, shaken by the encounter, pulled over and caught his breath, but there was no sign of the truck anywhere. The legend of the phantom truck continues to haunt those who travel Route 666, a chilling reminder that some roads are best avoided after dark. True Scary Stories from Texas. Story 1. The Phantom Hitchhiker of Bragg Road. The Candy Lady. Unraveling the terrifying Texas legend. Origins of the legend. The legend of the Candy Lady is believed to have originated in the early 1900s in a small rural town in Texas. The story centers around Clara Crane, a woman who endured unimaginable loss and grief, leading her down a dark and twisted path. According to the legend, Clara Crane was a loving wife until tragedy struck when her young daughter, Marcella, died in a horrific accident. Devastated by the loss, Clara's life spiraled out of control, eventually culminating in the murder of her husband, who she blamed for their daughter's death. The details of Clara's life before the tragedy are sketchy, but it's said that she was committed to a mental institution after her husband's murder. However, this is where the story takes a darker turn. Some versions of the tale suggest that Clara escaped from the asylum after only a few years. Others say she was released under mysterious circumstances, with the authorities losing track of her soon after. What is known, however, is that the legend of the Candy Lady began to take shape around this time, with whispers of a strange woman who lured children to their doom with promises of candy. The Candy Lady's reign of terror. The story goes that after her escape, Clara Crane, now known as the Candy Lady, began a reign of terror in the Texas countryside. Children in the area started to disappear without a trace, their last known whereabouts often linked to eerie tales of finding pieces of candy left on their windowsills. The candy, sweet and tantalizing, would appear night after night, luring the children closer to the edge of danger. It wasn't long before the disappearances became more frequent, and parents in the town grew increasingly alarmed. They would find notes written in a childish hand, stuffed inside the candy wrappers, notes that read, "Come play with me," or "I have more candy for you." These messages, along with the ever-growing number of missing children, led to widespread panic. As the number of disappearances climbed, rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed to have seen a ghostly figure lurking near the woods, her face hidden under a hood, her hands clutching a sack of candy. Others whispered of a shadowy presence watching from the darkness, her intentions far more sinister than they first appeared. The townspeople began to call her the Candy Lady, and a legend was born. Horrific discoveries. The climax of the Candy Lady's reign of terror is marked by a series of gruesome discoveries that further cemented her place in Texas folklore. As more children went missing, local authorities intensified their search, scouring the woods and abandoned buildings in the hopes of finding the lost boys and girls. It was during one such search that they made a horrifying discovery. A child's body, mutilated and left to rot, with candy stuffed into the eye sockets. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Suddenly, the legend of the Candy Lady was no longer just a story to frighten children into obedience, it was a real and terrifying threat. The gruesome nature of the crime scene suggested that the killer had a deep, twisted hatred for children, one that manifested in the most horrific ways imaginable. The local sheriff, who had been skeptical of the legend, was found dead shortly after the discovery, his eyes gouged out and his pockets filled with candy. This chilling twist added a new layer of fear to the legend, convincing even the most hardened skeptics that the Candy Lady was more than just a story. The aftermath and legacy. As suddenly as the Candy Lady appeared, she vanished, leaving behind a trail of grief and unanswered questions. The disappearances stopped, and the town slowly returned to normal, but the scars left by the legend were deep. Families who had lost children never recovered from the trauma, and the town itself seemed to carry the weight of the Candy Lady's deeds for generations. Over time, the legend of the Candy Lady became a cautionary tale, a story told to children to keep them from wandering too far from home or accepting treats from strangers. But beneath the surface, the story served as a reminder of the dark history that lurked in the shadows of this Texas town. Some believed that the Candy Lady was still out there, waiting for the right moment to return and continue her twisted game. In the years that followed, the legend grew, taking on new forms and variations. Some versions of the story claim that the Candy Lady was a witch, using her sweets to cast spells on the children she captured. Others suggest that she was a demon, feeding on the fear and despair of her victims. But despite the different interpretations, one thing remained constant: the Candy Lady was a figure of pure, unadulterated evil, a monster born from grief and madness. Exploring the myth. Like many urban legends, the story of the Candy Lady has its skeptics. Some argue that the tale was likely a fabrication, a story concocted to explain the tragic disappearances of children in a time when communication and law enforcement were far less sophisticated. Others believe that the legend may have been inspired by real-life events, such as the actions of serial killers or child predators, with the details exaggerated over time to create the myth of the Candy Lady. Historians and folklorists have attempted to trace the origins of the story, but concrete evidence remains elusive. The lack of historical records or verified accounts of Clara Crane and her supposed crimes has led some to dismiss the story as nothing more than a ghostly tale, born from the fears and superstitions of a bygone era. However, for those who grew up hearing the legend, the story of the Candy Lady remains all too real. It's a tale that taps into deep-seated fears, the fear of losing a child, the fear of the unknown, and the fear of what lurks in the darkness. Whether or not the Candy Lady ever truly existed, her story continues to be told, a chilling reminder of the power of folklore to shape our perceptions of the world around us. The Candy Lady in popular culture. The legend of the Candy Lady has found its way into popular culture, inspiring books, movies, and even episodes of television shows. Her story has become a staple of horror fiction, with writers and filmmakers drawn to the eerie, Southern Gothic atmosphere that surrounds her tale. The Candy Lady represents a uniquely American kind of horror, one that blends the supernatural with the psychological, creating a figure that is as much a product of the human mind as she is of the otherworldly. In recent years, the legend has experienced a resurgence, fueled by the internet and the growing popularity of urban legends and true crime stories. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and online forums have all contributed to keeping the story alive, with new generations discovering the chilling tale of the Candy Lady. Her story has become a part of the larger tapestry of American folklore, a symbol of the darkness that can exist even in the most seemingly innocent places. Conclusion: fact, fiction, or something in between. The tale of the Candy Lady is a potent mix of fact, fiction, and the unknown. It's a story that has transcended its origins to become a part of Texas' rich and haunting folklore. Whether she was a grieving mother turned vengeful spirit, a misunderstood figure, or a complete fabrication, the Candy Lady continues to captivate and terrify those who hear her story. The legend serves as a reminder of the power of storytelling and its ability to shape our fears and our understanding of the world. As long as there are dark woods to explore and tales to be told, the Candy Lady will remain a figure that haunts the imagination, a ghostly presence lingering on the edge of our collective consciousness. The tragic beginnings of Clara Crane. The origins of the Candy Lady legend are often traced back to a woman named Clara Crane, whose life was steeped in sorrow and loss. Born in the late 19th century, Clara lived in a small, close-knit town where she was known for her kindness and gentle demeanor. She married Leonard Crane, a farmer, and the two shared a modest but happy life, particularly after the birth of their daughter, Marcella. But the happiness was short-lived. When Marcella was just 5 years old, she died under mysterious circumstances, a tragedy that shattered Clara's world. The death of her beloved daughter drove Clara to the brink of insanity. Some say that Marcella's death was the result of an accident, while others believe it was due to negligence on the part of Leonard, who was rumored to have been drinking heavily at the time. The grief-stricken Clara became increasingly withdrawn, her once gentle nature twisted by bitterness and anger. She blamed Leonard for their daughter's death, and in a moment of madness, she poisoned him with candy laced with a lethal dose of arsenic. After Leonard's death, Clara was arrested and declared mentally unfit to stand trial. She was committed to the North Texas Lunatic Asylum, where she remained for several years. However, the story does not end there. According to the legend, Clara escaped from the asylum under mysterious circumstances, vanishing without a trace. It was after her disappearance that the eerie tale of the Candy Lady began to circulate, with many believing that Clara had transformed into the vengeful spirit known as the Candy Lady. The horrifying acts attributed to the Candy Lady. As the legend goes, following Clara's escape, children in the nearby towns began to disappear. It started innocently enough. Children would find candy on their windowsills in the morning, small, brightly colored sweets that seemed like a harmless treat. But soon, these treats were accompanied by handwritten notes, often scrawled in a childlike hand, urging the children to follow the trail of candy to the source. The messages were simple but chilling. "Come play with me," or "I have more candy for you." For a time, the children delighted in the mysterious treats, unaware of the danger lurking behind them. But as more children disappeared, the townspeople grew increasingly alarmed. The once innocent candy became a symbol of dread, and parents warned their children to stay away from the windows and to never, under any circumstances, take the candy. The notes grew more ominous, and rumors began to circulate that the Candy Lady was responsible for the disappearances. The few children who returned from their encounters with the Candy Lady were never the same. They spoke of a strange old woman with a wide, unsettling smile who offered them more sweets before leading them away to her home. These children described her house as a decrepit, rotting structure deep in the woods, filled with the smell of decay and the sight of other children's belongings. They claimed that the Candy Lady would sing lullabies to them, her voice soft and hypnotic, before she would suddenly turn violent, her demeanor shifting from sweet to malevolent in an instant. The disappearances continued for several years, with many of the missing children never being found. Those who were discovered were often mutilated, their bodies desecrated in grotesque ways, with candy stuffed into their mouths or placed in their empty eye sockets. The town was gripped by fear, and the legend of the Candy Lady grew, her name whispered in terror among children and adults alike. The investigation and the terrifying truth. As the number of disappearances mounted, local law enforcement agencies began to take the legend of the Candy Lady more seriously. The search for the missing children intensified, with entire communities banding together to scour the countryside. What they found only added to the horror of the tale. In a field near the edge of town, a farmer discovered a pile of rotting teeth wrapped in a piece of cloth, along with candy wrappers and scraps of paper bearing the same childlike handwriting that had been found in the earlier notes. Authorities followed this grisly trail to an abandoned farmhouse deep in the woods. Inside, they found evidence of unspeakable horrors, bloodstains, children's clothing, and the remains of what appeared to be makeshift cages. The most chilling discovery, however, was a collection of small candy wrappers and a diary that allegedly belonged to Clara Crane. The diary detailed her descent into madness, with entries describing how she lured children to her lair with promises of sweets, only to subject them to horrific torture before ending their lives. The investigation also led to the discovery of several unmarked graves on the property, each containing the remains of a child. The bodies were in various stages of decomposition, suggesting that the Candy Lady had been active for many years. Despite this evidence, Clara Crane was never found, and the case was eventually closed, with the authorities citing lack of conclusive proof. The disappearance of Clara Crane and the evidence found at the farmhouse only served to solidify the Candy Lady's place in Texas folklore. Even though the physical evidence pointed to a real person behind the legend, the townspeople couldn't shake the belief that there was something more supernatural at play. The story became a symbol of the community's darkest fears, an embodiment of the unknown terrors that lurked in the night. The psychological impact on the community. The legend of the Candy Lady left an indelible mark on the community, with its psychological impact lingering long after the events supposedly took place. For years, parents in the town would tell their children the story of the Candy Lady, using it as a cautionary tale to keep them from wandering too far from home or trusting strangers. The story served as a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the world and the consequences of naivety and misplaced trust. For the children who grew up hearing the legend, the Candy Lady became a symbol of fear, an ever-present threat that could strike at any moment. Even as adults, many of them carried the fear with them, passing the story down to their own children and perpetuating the cycle of terror. The legend took on a life of its own, evolving with each retelling and embedding itself deeper into the fabric of the community. Over time, the fear of the Candy Lady became intertwined with the broader anxieties and insecurities of the community. In a town where everyone knew each other, the idea that someone among them could be capable of such horrors was almost too much to bear. The legend provided a way to externalize those fears, turning them into something that could be contained and explained, even if only through the lens of folklore. Modern interpretations and the legacy of the Candy Lady. In the years since the legend of the Candy Lady first emerged, it has become a fixture in Texas folklore, with each new generation adding its own interpretations and embellishments to the story. The tale has inspired numerous works of fiction, from short stories and novels to films and television episodes. These modern retellings often explore the psychological horror of the story, delving into the themes of grief, madness, and the loss of innocence. Some versions of the legend have even crossed state lines, with variations of the Candy Lady story appearing in other parts of the United States. In these versions, the details may differ, the location, the names, the specific horrors, but the core of the story remains the same: a woman, driven to madness by loss, preying on the most vulnerable members of society in the most horrific way imaginable. In popular culture, the Candy Lady has become something of a boogeyman, a figure used to evoke fear and suspense. Her story has been featured in podcasts, true crime documentaries, and urban legend compilations, often presented as one of the most terrifying tales in American folklore. Despite the lack of concrete evidence to support the existence of the Candy Lady, her story continues to resonate, a testament to the power of folklore to capture the darkest aspects of the human experience. The unresolved mysteries. Despite the passage of time and the countless retellings of the legend, many questions about the Candy Lady remain unanswered. Was Clara Crane a real person, or was she a fictional character created to explain a series of tragic events? If she was real, did she truly commit the horrific acts attributed to her, or was she the victim of a town's collective hysteria? And perhaps most chillingly, if the Candy Lady was responsible for the disappearances, where did she go after her supposed escape from the asylum? These unresolved mysteries have only added to the allure of the legend, inviting speculation and debate among those who hear it. Some believe that the Candy Lady was a real person whose story was exaggerated over time, while others argue that she was entirely fictional, a manifestation of the fears and anxieties of the community. Still, others suggest that there may be some truth to the supernatural elements of the story, pointing to the eerie coincidences and unexplained events that have occurred in the area over the years. Whatever the truth may be, the legend of the Candy Lady remains one of the most haunting tales in Texas folklore. It is a story that continues to captivate and terrify, a reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural, and the enduring power of fear. Conclusion. The Candy Lady's place in folklore. The story of the Candy Lady is more than just a ghost story. It is a reflection of the fears and uncertainties that have plagued communities for generations. It is a tale that speaks to the universal fear of the unknown, the horror of losing a child, and the terror of being unable to protect those we love. The legend of the Candy Lady has endured for over a century, not because of its historical accuracy, but because of its ability to tap into these deep-seated fears. As long as there are dark nights and quiet woods, the story of the Candy Lady will continue to be told, a chilling reminder of the horrors that can exist just beyond the edge of our understanding. Whether she was a real person or a figment of collective imagination, the Candy Lady has become an enduring symbol of fear, a ghostly figure who haunts the nightmares of those who dare to believe in her. And so the legend lives on, whispered among children, recounted by storytellers, and immortalized in the annals of Texas folklore. The Candy Lady remains a terrifying figure, a shadowy presence that lingers in the minds of those who hear her story, a reminder that sometimes the most frightening monsters are the ones that come from within. The cultural and historical context of the Candy Lady legend. To fully understand the legend of the Candy Lady, it's essential to place it within the broader cultural and historical context of early 20th century Texas. The state, with its vast landscapes and relatively isolated communities, was fertile ground for folklore. In the early 1900s, rural Texas towns were often tight-knit, with everyone knowing each other's business. News traveled slowly, and in the absence of modern communication, rumors and stories could take on a life of their own. This environment, coupled with the hardships of life at the time, poverty, disease, and loss, created a perfect storm for the birth of legends. The story of Clara Crane, who is said to have become the Candy Lady, emerges from this backdrop. Her tale is one of extreme loss and mental unraveling, themes that would have resonated deeply with people living in an era where death, particularly the death of children, was a common and devastating occurrence. The psychological toll of such loss is reflected in the legend, where grief morphs into madness and a mother's love becomes something twisted and deadly. The Candy Lady, therefore, can be seen as a manifestation of the community's fears and anxieties, a representation of what can happen when grief and guilt consume a person. Unraveling the mystery of Clara Crane. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Candy Lady legend is the enigmatic figure of Clara Crane herself. According to the tale, Clara was a mother driven mad by the death of her daughter, but who was she really? Historical records from the time are sparse, but some local historians have attempted to piece together a more detailed picture of her life. Clara is believed to have been born in the late 1800s, a time when Texas was transitioning from the wild frontier to a more settled state. Her marriage to Leonard Crane was likely a typical union of the time, one built on survival and the harsh realities of rural life rather than romance. The tragedy that struck Clara's life, the death of her daughter Marcella, is a key turning point in the legend. Some versions of the story suggest that Marcella's death was a result of negligence, perhaps an accident that could have been prevented. Others hint at something more sinister, a deliberate act that was covered up. This ambiguity adds to the horror of the tale, as it leaves open the possibility that Clara's madness was fueled by a deeper, more disturbing truth. After Marcella's death, Clara's life reportedly spiraled out of control. Her descent into madness is marked by increasingly erratic behavior, culminating in the poisoning of her husband. The use of candy as the murder weapon is particularly symbolic, representing the perversion of something sweet and innocent into something deadly. This act sets the stage for Clara's transformation into the Candy Lady, a figure who uses the same method to lure and kill children. The connection between her personal tragedy and the subsequent horrors she inflicts on others is a chilling reminder of how grief can distort and destroy. The evolution of the legend over time. As with all folklore, the story of the Candy Lady has evolved over time, taking on new dimensions and meanings as it has been passed down through generations. In the early years, the legend was likely a local story, shared among the residents of the small Texas towns where the disappearances occurred. However, as the years went by, the tale spread beyond its original boundaries, becoming a part of the larger tapestry of American urban legends. One of the most fascinating aspects of this evolution is how the Candy Lady has been reinterpreted in different contexts. In some versions of the story, she is portrayed as a purely supernatural entity, a ghost or demon who preys on children. In others, she is depicted as a more human figure, a deranged woman who, driven by grief, becomes a child murderer. These differing interpretations reflect the changing cultural landscape of America, where the line between the real and the supernatural often blurs in the stories we tell. In recent decades, the legend of the Candy Lady has been revitalized by the internet, where urban legends and true crime stories have found new audiences. Online communities dedicated to horror and folklore have embraced the story, retelling it in blogs, podcasts, and videos. This digital renaissance has not only kept the legend alive, but has also introduced it to a global audience, ensuring that the Candy Lady remains a part of the horror genre for years to come. The psychological impact and symbolism. The enduring power of the Candy Lady legend lies in its psychological impact and rich symbolism. At its core, the story is about the corruption of innocence, the transformation of a mother's love into something monstrous. The candy that Clara uses to lure her victims is a symbol of this perversion. Candy, typically associated with childhood joy and innocence, becomes a tool of death and destruction in the hands of the Candy Lady. This inversion of a symbol of sweetness into one of horror speaks to the deep anxieties that underlie the legend. The Candy Lady can also be seen as a representation of the fear of the unknown, particularly the unknown dangers that can lurk within one's own community. In the early 20th century, when communication and transportation were limited, communities were often isolated, and the idea that a killer could be living among them was a source of profound fear. The legend taps into this fear, suggesting that even in the most familiar places, danger can be lurking just out of sight. Additionally, the story of the Candy Lady resonates with the universal fear of losing a child. The disappearances of the children in the legend represent every parent's worst nightmare, and the horrifying fates that befall them underscore the helplessness that comes with such loss. The legend plays on these fears, turning them into a cautionary tale that has been used to warn children and adults alike about the dangers of trusting strangers. The Candy Lady in modern popular culture. In modern popular culture, the Candy Lady has taken on a life of her own, becoming a figure of fascination for horror enthusiasts and storytellers. Her story has inspired a variety of creative works, from short stories and novels to films and television shows. In these retellings, the Candy Lady is often portrayed as a complex villain, one whose actions are driven by a tragic past. This portrayal adds depth to the character, making her more than just a one-dimensional monster. One of the most significant modern adaptations of the Candy Lady legend is its inclusion in true crime and paranormal documentaries, where it is often featured as one of America's most chilling urban legends. These documentaries explore the history of the legend, examining the possible real-life events that could have inspired it, as well as the psychological and cultural factors that have kept it alive. The inclusion of the Candy Lady in these documentaries has helped to cement her place in the pantheon of American horror figures. The legend has also made its way into the world of video games and graphic novels, where the Candy Lady is often reimagined as a supernatural entity with otherworldly powers. These adaptations take creative liberties with the story, incorporating elements of fantasy and horror to create a character that is both terrifying and captivating. In these modern retellings, the Candy Lady is often depicted as a ghostly figure who haunts the woods, luring children to their doom with her deadly sweets. The ongoing fascination with the Candy Lady. The ongoing fascination with the Candy Lady is a testament to the power of folklore and the human need to understand and confront our fears through storytelling. The legend has persisted for over a century, not just because it is a compelling story, but because it speaks to deep-seated fears and anxieties that are universal. The Candy Lady represents the dark side of human nature, the capacity for grief to turn into madness, for love to become something twisted and deadly. For many, the legend of the Candy Lady is more than just a story. It is a reflection of the darker aspects of society, a reminder of the potential for evil that exists within us all. The tale serves as a cautionary reminder of the dangers that can arise when we allow our fears and emotions to consume us. It also highlights the importance of community and vigilance, as the legend warns of the horrors that can occur when we fail to protect those who are most vulnerable. The Candy Lady continues to captivate the imaginations of those who hear her story, her legend enduring as a chilling reminder of the power of fear and the unknown. Whether she was a real person or a fictional creation, the Candy Lady has left an indelible mark on Texas folklore and American horror. Her story is one that will continue to be told for generations to come, a haunting tale of loss, madness, and the terrifying consequences of unchecked grief. Conclusion: the Candy Lady's enduring legacy. The legend of the Candy Lady is more than just a ghost story. It is a reflection of the fears, anxieties, and cultural dynamics of the time in which it was born. It is a tale that has evolved over the years, taking on new meanings and interpretations as it has been passed down through generations. Today, the Candy Lady remains a potent symbol of horror, a figure who represents the darkest aspects of human nature and the dangers that can arise when we allow our fears to take control. As we look back on the story of the Candy Lady, we see a legend that is as complex and multifaceted as the human experience itself. It is a story that speaks to our deepest fears, our greatest losses, and our ongoing struggle to make sense of the world around us. Whether real or imagined, the Candy Lady has become a part of the cultural fabric of Texas and beyond, a figure who will continue to haunt our nightmares and captivate our imaginations for years to come. In the end, the legend of the Candy Lady is a reminder of the enduring power of folklore, the ability of stories to capture our deepest fears and to give voice to the unspeakable horrors that lurk in the shadows. It is a tale that will continue to be told, whispered in the dark and shared around campfires, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that we create ourselves. The rise of the legend, how the Candy Lady became a household name. In the early 20th century, Texas was a land of vast, uncharted territories and close-knit rural communities. Life in these towns was often hard, marked by poverty, isolation, and a constant struggle against the elements. It was in this environment that the legend of the Candy Lady took root, growing from whispers and rumors into a story that would haunt the state for decades to come. The legend first gained notoriety when children in rural Texas towns began to vanish under mysterious circumstances. At the time, these disappearances were attributed to natural causes, perhaps a wild animal attack or a tragic accident, but as more children went missing, a pattern began to emerge. Parents started to notice small pieces of candy left on their children's windowsills, along with notes written in an eerie, childlike scrawl. The candy, once a symbol of sweetness and joy, now carried a sinister connotation, a lure meant to draw the children into something far more dangerous. As the disappearances continued, the story of the Candy Lady began to spread. It wasn't long before every parent in the area had heard the tale of the mysterious woman who lured children away with candy, only to spirit them off to a fate unknown. The legend grew with each retelling, gaining new details and embellishments until it became an integral part of the region's folklore. The Candy Lady was no longer just a story, she was a very real threat, a figure who haunted the dreams of children and adults alike. The mysterious disappearances and the town's descent into panic. The Candy Lady's reign of terror reached its peak when entire families began to report their children missing. The small, rural towns of Texas were ill-equipped to deal with such a crisis, and the fear that gripped these communities was palpable. With no clues to follow and no suspects to apprehend, the local authorities were at a loss, and the townspeople were left to fend for themselves against an unseen enemy. The towns were plunged into a state of panic, with parents refusing to let their children out of their sight. Windows were nailed shut, and doors were locked tight at night. The once thriving community events where children played freely were abandoned, and a sense of dread hung over the town like a dark cloud. The Candy Lady had not only taken the children, she had taken the town's sense of safety and security. As the weeks turned into months, the legend of the Candy Lady grew darker. Stories circulated of children who had been found wandering the woods, their minds broken by the horrors they had witnessed. These children spoke of a woman with a voice as sweet as honey who promised them candy if they would only follow her. They described a decrepit house hidden deep in the forest where the smell of rot and decay hung in the air and where other children's voices echoed from the shadows. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these tales was the Candy Lady herself. She was often described as an old woman with hollow eyes and a smile that never reached her lips. Her clothes were tattered, and she moved with an unnatural grace, as if she were a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. The children who escaped her clutches were never the same, their innocence shattered by the horrors they had endured. The hunt for the Candy Lady, a community in crisis. As the disappearances continued and the fear in the community reached a fever pitch, a group of local men decided to take matters into their own hands. They formed a vigilant group, determined to track down the Candy Lady and put an end to her reign of terror. Armed with shotguns and torches, they scoured the woods and fields, searching for any sign of the mysterious woman who had been preying on their children. The search lasted for weeks, with the men covering every inch of the surrounding countryside. They found nothing but empty fields and silent woods, no trace of the Candy Lady, no evidence of where she might be hiding. Some of the men began to wonder if she was even real, or if she was just a figment of the townspeople's collective imagination. But others were convinced that she was out there, watching them from the shadows, waiting for her next victim. The search finally came to an end when the men stumbled upon an abandoned farmhouse deep in the woods. The house was in a state of disrepair, with broken windows and a sagging roof, but there was something about it that sent a chill down their spines. As they approached the house, they noticed a faint smell of something sweet and rotten, a smell that reminded them of the candy their children had found on their windowsills. Inside the house, the men found a scene straight out of a nightmare. The walls were covered in scratch marks, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. The floors were littered with candy wrappers and scraps of paper, and in the corner of the room, they found a pile of children's clothes, neatly folded and stacked. But the most horrifying discovery was a small, blood-stained doll lying on the floor, its glass eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Despite their best efforts, the men never found the Candy Lady. The house was searched from top to bottom, but there was no sign of her, no clue as to where she had gone. The only thing they found was a single note, written in the same childlike scrawl that had been found on the candy wrappers. It read, "She's watching you." The aftermath, how the Candy Lady became a symbol of fear. The discovery of the abandoned farmhouse marked the end of the Candy Lady's reign of terror, but the legend lived on. The townspeople never forgot the fear and dread that had gripped their community, and the story of the Candy Lady was passed down from generation to generation as a cautionary tale. Parents would tell their children the story to keep them from wandering too far from home, and the Candy Lady became a symbol of the dangers that lurked in the world outside their small rural town. But the legend of the Candy Lady was not just a story to scare children, it was also a reflection of the fears and anxieties of the community. In a time when life was hard and the world was full of unknown dangers, the Candy Lady represented the ultimate threat, the loss of a child, the breakdown of safety and security, and the fear of the unknown. The story was a way for the townspeople to make sense of their fears, to give a name and a face to the things that terrified them most. As the years went by, the legend of the Candy Lady evolved, taking on new forms and meanings. Some versions of the story suggested that the Candy Lady was not just a vengeful spirit, but a witch or demon who used her powers to lure children to their doom. Others claimed that she was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. The details of the story may have changed, but the core of the legend remained the same, a tale of fear, loss, and the dangers that lurk in the shadows. The Candy Lady's legacy. A legend that endures. Today, the legend of the Candy Lady is more than just a story. It is a part of Texas cultural heritage, a symbol of the state's rich and often dark history. The tale has inspired countless works of fiction, from horror novels to films, and it continues to be a popular topic of discussion in online forums and podcasts dedicated to urban legends and folklore. The enduring appeal of the Candy Lady lies in her ability to tap into some of our deepest fears, the fear of losing a loved one, the fear of the unknown, and the fear of what lies beyond the edges of our understanding. She is a figure who represents the darker aspects of human nature, a reminder that even in the most idyllic of settings, danger can be lurking just out of sight. In a way, the Candy Lady has become a modern-day boogeyman, a figure who embodies the anxieties and fears of a new generation. Her story is one that continues to resonate with people, not just because it is terrifying, but because it speaks to something universal, the fear of what we cannot see, and the terror of what might be waiting for us in the darkness. The psychological and cultural impact of the Candy Lady legend. The Candy Lady legend is more than just a tale of horror. It is a window into the psyche of the community that gave birth to it. The story reflects the fears and anxieties of a time when life was uncertain and danger was ever present. In the early 20th century, rural Texas was a place where death and loss were common, and the fear of losing a child was a constant undercurrent in the lives of parents. The Candy Lady legend can be seen as a way for the community to process these fears, to give form to the intangible anxieties that haunted them. The psychological impact of the Candy Lady legend is profound. For those who grew up hearing the story, the Candy Lady became a symbol of the ultimate fear, the fear of the unknown. She was a reminder that danger could strike at any moment, and that even the most innocent-seeming things, like a piece of candy, could be a trap. The legend served as a cautionary tale, a way for parents to protect their children by instilling in them a healthy fear of the unknown. Culturally, the Candy Lady legend is a reflection of the time and place in which it was born. In a world where communication was limited and news traveled slowly, stories like the Candy Lady filled the gaps, providing explanations for the unexplained and a sense of control in a chaotic world. The legend also speaks to the power of storytelling and how stories can shape our perceptions of the world around us. The Candy Lady in the modern era, from folklore to pop culture icon. In the modern era, the Candy Lady has transcended her origins as a local legend and has become a pop culture icon. Her story has been featured in books, movies, and television shows, and she has become a popular subject for horror enthusiasts and true crime aficionados. The legend has even inspired urban exploration, with people venturing into the Texas countryside in search of the abandoned farmhouse where the Candy Lady is said to have lived. The internet has played a significant role in the resurgence of the Candy Lady legend. Online forums, podcasts, and YouTube channels dedicated to urban legends have introduced the story to a new generation of listeners, many of whom are captivated by the tale's blend of horror and mystery. The digital age has allowed the legend to spread far beyond its Texas origins, making the Candy Lady a figure of national and even international interest. The Candy Lady's transition from folklore to pop culture icon is a testament to the enduring power of the story. It is a tale that continues to resonate with people, not just because it is frightening, but because it speaks to universal fears and anxieties. The legend has proven to be adaptable, evolving with the times while maintaining its core elements of horror and mystery. Conclusion: the Candy Lady's place in Texas folklore. The legend of the Candy Lady is a story that has withstood the test of time, evolving from a local tale of terror into a widely recognized piece of Texas folklore. It is a story that speaks to the darkest corners of the human psyche, exploring themes of grief, madness, and the corruption of innocence. The Candy Lady is more than just a ghost story. She is a symbol of the fears that haunt us all, a reminder that even the most seemingly innocent things can hide a sinister reality. As we reflect on the Candy Lady legend, we see a story that is as complex as it is terrifying. It is a tale that has grown and changed over the years, taking on new meanings and interpretations as it has been passed down through generations. Yet, at its core, it remains a story about fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of loss, and the fear of what lies just beyond the edges of our understanding. The Candy Lady will continue to be a part of Texas folklore, her story told and retold by those who seek to understand the darker aspects of human nature. Whether she was a real person or a figment of collective imagination, the Candy Lady has left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves. Clara Crane, the woman behind the legend. The story of the Candy Lady begins with Clara Crane, a woman whose life was marked by an unimaginable tragedy that would lead her down a path of madness. Born in the late 19th century, Clara was an ordinary woman living in rural Texas. She married Leonard Crane, and together they had a daughter, Marcella. Their life was simple, yet happy, until a tragic accident claimed the life of their beloved daughter. Marcella's death shattered Clara's world. She fell into a deep depression, consumed by grief and guilt. The once loving mother became withdrawn and cold, her mental state deteriorating with each passing day. The townspeople began to notice strange behavior from Clara, who would spend hours at her daughter's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. The community's concern grew when Clara was rumored to have started giving candy to local children, saying it was from Marcella. As the years went by, Clara's grief turned to rage, particularly towards her husband Leonard, whom she blamed for Marcella's death. In a fit of madness, she poisoned Leonard, using candy laced with arsenic. This act of murder marked the beginning of Clara's transformation from a grieving mother to the notorious Candy Lady. After Leonard's death, Clara was arrested and declared mentally unfit to stand trial. She was committed to the North Texas Lunatic Asylum, where she was supposed to spend the rest of her life. But Clara's story didn't end there. According to legend, she managed to escape the asylum under mysterious circumstances, disappearing into the night. Her escape marked the birth of the Candy Lady, as the legend would have it, a vengeful spirit, or perhaps a deranged woman, who preyed on the children of rural Texas, luring them with sweets only to lead them to their doom. The legend grows. The disappearances begin. Following Clara's escape, strange occurrences began to plague the small towns of Texas. It started with candy left on the windowsills of children's bedrooms, brightly colored sweets that appeared overnight, seemingly out of nowhere. The children, naturally drawn to the candy, would eagerly take it, often finding themselves visited by the mysterious figure who left it there. At first, the candy seemed like a harmless treat, but soon, parents began to notice their children whispering about a kind woman who offered them more sweets and invitations to come out and play. As the candy deliveries continued, the townspeople grew uneasy. The children began to speak of a woman with a sweet, soothing voice who promised them more candy if they followed her. Some children returned from their encounters with the Candy Lady, but others did not. Those who returned were often too traumatized to speak of what they had seen, their eyes wide with terror, their words incoherent. The disappearances escalated, and the community's fear turned into hysteria. Parents kept their children indoors, and the once friendly towns turned into places of suspicion and dread. The legend of the Candy Lady became more than just a story. It was a palpable fear that gripped the hearts of everyone in the area. The candy, once a symbol of innocence and joy, had become a harbinger of death, a lure that led children to a fate worse than anything their parents could imagine. The horrific discoveries, when the legend became reality. The legend of the Candy Lady took on a horrifying reality when the bodies of several missing children were found. These discoveries were the stuff of nightmares, gruesome scenes that shocked even the most hardened members of the community. The bodies were often found in remote areas, their eyes gouged out and replaced with candy. Some were found with notes stuffed in their mouths, bearing the same childlike handwriting that had been found on the candy wrappers. These discoveries solidified the Candy Lady's place in Texas folklore as a figure of pure evil. The gruesome nature of the crime suggested that the perpetrator harbored a deep and twisted hatred for children. The notes left with the bodies were particularly chilling, often containing messages like, "No more candy for you," or "You should have been good." These messages, combined with the mutilation of the bodies, painted a picture of a killer who derived pleasure from the suffering of her victims. The local authorities, initially skeptical of the supernatural elements of the story, could no longer deny that something horrific was happening. The sheriff, who had dismissed the legend as mere superstition, became a believer when he himself was found dead under mysterious circumstances. His body was discovered in his office, his eyes gouged out and his pockets filled with candy, a grim reminder that the Candy Lady could strike anyone, anywhere. The Candy Lady's legacy, a tale that refuses to die. As suddenly as the disappearances began, they stopped. The Candy Lady seemed to vanish without a trace, leaving behind only the terror and the grief she had inflicted on the community. But while the physical threat may have disappeared, the legend lived on. The townspeople never forgot the horror that had visited them, and the story of the Candy Lady was passed down through generations, each retelling adding new layers of fear and mystery. Over time, the Candy Lady became a fixture of local folklore, a story that parents told their children to keep them from wandering too far from home. The legend also served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of trusting strangers, a lesson that was deeply ingrained in the community's collective consciousness. The Candy Lady became more than just a ghost story. She became a symbol of the dark side of human nature, a reminder that even the most innocent-seeming things can hide a sinister reality. In the years since the legend first emerged, it has taken on a life of its own. The story of the Candy Lady has been retold in countless books, movies, and television shows, each version adding new twists and turns to the tale. The character of the Candy Lady has become a pop culture icon, a figure who embodies the fears and anxieties of the modern world. Psychological and symbolic interpretations of the Candy Lady. The Candy Lady legend resonates on a deep psychological level, tapping into some of our most primal fears. At its core, the story is about the corruption of innocence, the transformation of something sweet and harmless into something deadly. The candy that Clara uses to lure her victims is a symbol of this perversion, representing the way in which the things we trust can become instruments of our destruction. The Candy Lady herself can be seen as a representation of the dangers that lurk within the human psyche. Her transformation from a grieving mother into a child killer reflects the ways in which grief and guilt can twist a person's mind, turning love into hate and nurturing into destruction. The legend suggests that the true horror lies not in the supernatural elements of the story, but in the very real possibility that anyone, under the right circumstances, can become a monster. The story also speaks to the fear of the unknown, particularly the unknown dangers that can lurk within one's own community. In a world where communication was limited and life was uncertain, the idea that a killer could be living among them was a source of profound fear. The Candy Lady legend provided a way for the community to externalize these fears, turning them into something tangible that could be confronted and, ultimately, defeated. The Candy Lady in popular culture, a modern-day boogeyman. In the modern era, the Candy Lady has become a symbol of horror and fear, a figure who has transcended her origins to become a pop culture icon. Her story has been featured in a wide range of media, from horror novels and short stories to films and television shows. Each adaptation brings a new perspective to the legend, exploring different aspects of the Candy Lady's character and the psychological horror that she represents. One of the most significant ways in which the Candy Lady has entered modern popular culture is through the internet. The rise of online forums, podcasts, and YouTube channels dedicated to urban legends and true crime stories has introduced the Candy Lady to a new generation of horror enthusiasts. These digital platforms have allowed the legend to spread far beyond its Texas origins, making the Candy Lady a figure of national and even international interest. The Candy Lady's popularity in popular culture is a testament to the enduring power of the legend. Her story continues to resonate with people, not just because it is frightening, but because it speaks to universal fears and anxieties. The Candy Lady has become a modern-day boogeyman, a figure who embodies the darkest aspects of human nature and the dangers that can arise when we allow our fears to take control. Conclusion: the Candy Lady's enduring influence. The legend of the Candy Lady is a story that has endured for over a century, evolving from a local tale of terror into a widely recognized piece of American folklore. It is a story that explores the darker corners of the human psyche, delving into themes of grief, madness, and the loss of innocence. The Candy Lady is more than just a ghost story. She is a symbol of the fears and anxieties that have haunted communities for generations. As we reflect on the Candy Lady legend, we see a story that has grown and changed over the years, taking on new meanings and interpretations with each retelling. Yet, at its core, it remains a story about fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of loss, and the fear of what lies just beyond the edges of our understanding. The Candy Lady will continue to be a part of Texas folklore, a story told and retold by those who seek to understand the darker aspects of human nature. Whether she was a real person or a figment of collective imagination, the Candy Lady has left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves. The Candy Lady's first victims, the disappearance of innocence. The story of the Candy Lady is most terrifying because it targets the most vulnerable members of society, children. As the legend goes, after Clara Crane's escape from the asylum, she retreated to the rural areas of Texas, where she began a campaign of terror that would forever etch her name into local legend. Her method was simple yet horrifyingly effective. She would leave candy on the windowsills of children's bedrooms, drawing them out of the safety of their homes and into her clutches. The first reported disappearance attributed to the Candy Lady involved a young boy named Johnny, who was last seen playing in his yard. His parents found a trail of candy leading away from the house, and by the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late. Johnny had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a small pile of candy wrappers and a note that simply read, "Gone to play, be back soon." As the disappearances continued, the once peaceful town was gripped by fear. Parents became increasingly paranoid, and the sight of candy, once a symbol of childhood innocence and joy, became a source of terror. The children who returned from encounters with the Candy Lady were forever changed, their innocence stripped away by the horrors they had witnessed. They spoke in whispers of a woman with a kind voice who promised them candy and games, only to reveal her true nature when it was too late to escape. The loss of these children marked the beginning of a dark chapter in the town's history, one that would be remembered for generations to come. The Candy Lady's victims were not just the children she lured away, but the entire community, which was forever scarred by the fear and uncertainty that her actions brought. The search for answers: was the Candy Lady real? One of the most enduring aspects of the Candy Lady legend is the question of whether she was a real person or simply a figment of the community's collective imagination. Over the years, historians and folklorists have attempted to trace the origins of the story, sifting through historical records and eyewitness accounts in search of the truth. What they have found is a mix of fact and fiction, a tapestry of stories that together form the legend we know today. The real-life inspiration for the Candy Lady is often linked to the mysterious case of Clara Crane, a woman who was indeed committed to a mental institution after poisoning her husband. However, the details of her life after her escape are shrouded in mystery. There are no official records that confirm Clara's whereabouts after she fled the asylum, leading some to speculate that she may have died in obscurity, while others believe she continued her reign of terror under a different name. Adding to the mystery are the reports of missing children in the area during the time Clara was supposedly active. While some historians have found evidence of unexplained disappearances, there is no concrete proof linking them to a single perpetrator. This lack of evidence has led to various interpretations of the legend, with some viewing it as a cautionary tale born out of the community's fears, while others believe there is a kernel of truth at its core. The ambiguity surrounding the Candy Lady's existence only serves to enhance the legend's mystique. Whether she was a real person or not, the impact of the story on the community was undeniable. The fear she instilled in the townspeople was real, as were the changes in behavior that followed her supposed reign of terror. In this way, the legend of the Candy Lady blurs the line between myth and reality, leaving us to wonder how much of the story is true and how much is a product of our darkest fears. The Candy Lady's transformation into a supernatural entity. As the story of the Candy Lady spread, it began to take on a more supernatural tone. What started as a tale of a madwoman preying on children gradually evolved into a story of a vengeful spirit, a ghostly figure who could not be killed or captured. This transformation from human to supernatural entity is a common theme in folklore, where the boundaries between life and death, reality, and the paranormal are often fluid. In the supernatural version of the Candy Lady legend, Clara Crane did not merely escape from the asylum. She died there, and her spirit returned to exact revenge on the community that had wronged her. In this telling, the Candy Lady is no longer a flesh and blood woman, but a ghostly presence who haunts the woods and fields, waiting to lure children to their doom. The idea of the Candy Lady as a supernatural being adds a new layer of horror to the story. As a ghost, she cannot be stopped by conventional means. She can appear and disappear at will, and she is driven not by human motives, but by a relentless desire for vengeance. This version of the story plays on the fear of the unknown, the idea that there are forces beyond our control that can strike without warning. The supernatural elements of the Candy Lady legend also tap into deeper cultural fears about death and the afterlife. In many cultures, ghosts are seen as restless spirits, souls who have unfinished business or who were wronged in life. The Candy Lady, in this interpretation, becomes a symbol of unresolved grief and anger, a manifestation of the town's collective guilt for failing to protect the children who fell victim to her. The influence of the Candy Lady on local culture. The legend of the Candy Lady has had a profound impact on the culture of the communities where the story is told. Over the years, the tale has become more than just a ghost story. It has become a part of the local identity, a shared narrative that unites people through a common fear. This cultural significance is reflected in the way the story is passed down from generation to generation, each retelling adding new details and interpretations. In some towns, the Candy Lady is still used as a cautionary figure, a way to teach children about the dangers of trusting strangers or wandering too far from home. The story is often told around campfires or during Halloween, when the line between the living and the dead is believed to be at its thinnest. The Candy Lady has become a modern-day boogeyman, a figure who embodies the fears and anxieties of both children and adults. The legend has also influenced local traditions and customs. In some areas, Parents continue to warn their children about the dangers of taking candy from strangers, using the story of the Candy Lady as a way to instill caution. The tale has even inspired local festivals and events, where people gather to celebrate their shared folklore and keep the story alive. In this way, the Candy Lady has become more than just a character in a story. She has become a symbol of the community's collective fears and values. The legend serves as a reminder of the importance of protecting the vulnerable, of staying vigilant in the face of danger, and of the ways in which our fears can shape our behavior and beliefs. The Candy Lady in the modern age, from folklore to fiction. In the modern age, the legend of the Candy Lady has found new life in the world of fiction and entertainment. The story has been adapted into numerous books, movies, and television shows, each version offering a unique take on the legend. These adaptations often explore the psychological and supernatural elements of the story, delving into the Candy Lady's motivations and the impact of her actions on the community. One of the most popular genres for Candy Lady adaptations is horror, where the story's blend of real-world terror and supernatural horror makes it a perfect fit. In these adaptations, the Candy Lady is often portrayed as a malevolent spirit, a figure who embodies the darkest aspects of human nature. Her character is frequently used to explore themes of grief, madness, and the consequences of unresolved trauma. The Candy Lady has also become a popular subject in the world of true crime, where her story is often featured in podcasts, documentaries, and online forums dedicated to urban legends. These platforms have introduced the legend to a global audience, ensuring that the story continues to be told and retold in new and interesting ways. In the digital age, the Candy Lady has become a symbol of the power of storytelling. Her story is a reminder that legends are not static, they evolve and change over time, reflecting the fears and concerns of the people who tell them. The Candy Lady is a testament to the enduring power of folklore, a story that continues to captivate and terrify audiences, even in a world where the line between myth and reality increasingly blurred. Conclusion: the eternal horror of the Candy Lady. The legend of the Candy Lady is a story that has stood the test of time, evolving from a local tale of terror into a widely recognized piece of American folklore. It is a story that explores the darkest corners of the human psyche, delving into themes of grief, madness, and the loss of innocence. The Candy Lady is more than just a ghost story. She is a symbol of the fears and anxieties that have haunted communities for generations. As we reflect on the Candy Lady legend, we see a story that has grown and changed over the years, taking on new meanings and interpretations with each retelling. Yet, at its core, it remains a story about fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of loss, and the fear of what lies just beyond the edges of our understanding. The Candy Lady will continue to be a part of Texas folklore, her story told and retold by those who seek to understand the darker aspects of human nature. Whether she was a real person or a figment of collective imagination, the Candy Lady has left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves. The legend of the Candy Lady reminds us that stories have the power to shape our reality, to influence our beliefs and behaviors, and to connect us to our past. It is a story that will continue to be told as long as there are those who are willing to listen, a tale that will haunt the imaginations of generations to come. The cultural resonance of the Candy Lady. The enduring appeal of the Candy Lady legend lies not just in its horror, but in its deep cultural resonance. At its heart, the story is a reflection of societal fears, of losing our children, of the unknown dangers lurking just beyond the familiar, and of the ways in which grief and madness can transform even the most ordinary person into something monstrous. The Candy Lady taps into these primal fears, making her a figure of both terror and fascination. In the early 20th century, the communities where the Candy Lady legend took root were small, tight-knit, and often isolated. These were places where everyone knew everyone else, where the loss of a child was a tragedy that affected the entire town. The idea that someone from within the community, a trusted neighbor, perhaps, could be responsible for such horror was almost too terrible to contemplate. Yet this is precisely what the Candy Lady represents: the betrayal of trust, the perversion of safety, and the ultimate invasion of the sanctity of home. The legend also speaks to broader cultural anxieties of the time. As America moved from the rural, agrarian society of the 19th century into the modern age, there was a growing fear of the unknown, of the changes that came with industrialization, urbanization, and the loss of traditional ways of life. The Candy Lady, with her old-fashioned, almost quaint method of luring children with sweets, is a symbol of this tension, a figure who embodies both the nostalgia for a simpler time and the terror of its dark underside. The psychological dimensions of the Candy Lady legend. On a psychological level, the Candy Lady legend is a powerful exploration of the themes of loss, madness, and the corruption of innocence. The story begins with the tragic death of Clara Crane's daughter, Marcella, a loss that drives Clara to the brink of insanity. In many ways, the legend can be seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unprocessed grief and unresolved trauma. Clara's descent into madness and her transformation into the Candy Lady is a metaphor for how grief can distort and destroy, turning love into something twisted and deadly. The candy that Clara uses to lure her victims is a potent symbol in this context. Candy is typically associated with childhood, innocence, and joy, but in the hands of the Candy Lady, it becomes an instrument of death. This inversion of a symbol of innocence into one of horror speaks to the deep psychological impact of trauma, the way in which something sweet and pure can be corrupted, turned into a tool of destruction. The Candy Lady's method of operation, leaving candy on windowsills, luring children away from their homes, also taps into deep-seated fears about the safety of home and family. The home is supposed to be a place of safety, a refuge from the dangers of the outside world. But in the Candy Lady legend, the very things that make a home safe, its familiarity, its routine, are used against it. The candy left on the windowsill is an invasion of that safety, a violation of the boundary between inside and outside, home and the unknown. This psychological dimension of the legend is what makes the Candy Lady so terrifying. She is not just a monster who preys on children, she is a symbol of the ways in which the most mundane aspects of life can be twisted into something horrifying. She represents the fear that the things we trust most, our homes, our communities. The evolution of the Candy Lady, from local legend to national phenomenon. As with many urban legends, the story of the Candy Lady has evolved over time, growing from a local tale of terror into a national phenomenon. The basic elements of the story, Clara Crane, the poisoned candy, the missing children, have remained the same, but each new retelling has added new layers, new interpretations, and new horrors. In the early days of the legend, the Candy Lady was primarily a cautionary tale, told to children to keep them from wandering too far from home or accepting candy from strangers. But as the story spread beyond its original community, it began to take on new meanings. In some versions of the story, the Candy Lady is a vengeful spirit, driven by her need to avenge her daughter's death. In others, she is a demon or witch, using her candy to cast spells and trap children's souls. The legend has also been influenced by the changing cultural landscape of America. In the 1950s and 60s, for example, the story of the Candy Lady was often told alongside other urban legends about poisoned Halloween candy, reflecting the growing concerns about child safety in an increasingly industrialized and urbanized society. In the 1980s and 90s, the story was often used to explore themes of stranger danger as parents became more concerned about the potential threats posed by outsiders in their communities. In the 21st century, the Candy Lady has become a symbol of the darker side of nostalgia. In an era where retro and vintage culture is celebrated, the Candy Lady represents the horror that can lie beneath the surface of seemingly innocent things. Her story has been adapted into films, books, and television shows, often with a focus on the psychological horror of her methods and the impact of her actions on the community. The Candy Lady in contemporary media, a new icon of horror. In contemporary media, the Candy Lady has become an iconic figure of horror, a character who embodies the fear of the unknown and the corruption of innocence. She has been featured in a variety of films, television shows, and books, each one exploring different aspects of her legend and adding new dimensions to her character. In many modern adaptations, the Candy Lady is portrayed as a tragic figure, a woman driven to madness by the loss of her daughter and the failure of her community to protect her. This portrayal adds a layer of complexity to the character, making her more than just a one-dimensional villain. It also highlights the themes of grief, loss, and trauma that are central to the legend. The Candy Lady has also become a popular subject in the world of true crime and urban legends. Her story is often featured in podcasts, documentaries, and online forums dedicated to exploring the darker side of human nature. These platforms have introduced the legend to a new generation of horror enthusiasts, ensuring that the story of the Candy Lady continues to be told and retold. In many ways, the Candy Lady has become a modern-day boogeyman, a figure who embodies the fears and anxieties of the contemporary world. Her story is a reminder that the things we fear most are often the things that are closest to us, the people we trust, the places we call home, and the emotions we keep hidden away. The Candy Lady is a symbol of the darkness that can lie just beneath the surface of everyday life, waiting to be unleashed. The legacy of the Candy Lady. A tale that will not die. The legend of the Candy Lady is a story that refuses to die. It has been passed down from generation to generation, each retelling adding new layers of meaning and horror. The story has evolved from a local tale of terror into a national phenomenon, a symbol of the fears and anxieties that have haunted communities for generations. At its core, the legend of the Candy Lady is a story about the corruption of innocence, the dangers of unprocessed grief, and the fear of the unknown. It is a story that speaks to the darkest corners of the human psyche, exploring the ways in which love can turn into hate, safety can turn into danger, and trust can turn into betrayal. The Candy Lady will continue to be a part of American folklore, her story told and retold by those who seek to understand the darker aspects of human nature. Whether she was a real person or a figment of collective imagination, the Candy Lady has left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves. As long as there are dark nights and quiet streets, the story of the Candy Lady will continue to be told, a tale that will haunt the imaginations of those who dare to listen, a story that will never truly die. The Candy Lady. Unraveling the terrifying Texas legend. Origins of the legend. The legend of the Candy Lady is believed to have originated in the early 1900s in a small rural town in The Candy Man. A terrifying horror story. In the quiet, unassuming town of Willow Creek, there was a legend that the elders would whisper about, a tale so chilling that even the bravest souls would shudder at its mere mention. This was the legend of the Candy Man, a sinister figure who was said to haunt the shadows, luring children to their doom with the promise of sweet, sugary treats. The story was often dismissed as just that, a story, a way to keep children from wandering off alone. But as with all legends, there was a dark truth buried beneath the surface, one that would soon come to light in the most horrifying of ways. The story begins many decades ago, in the late 19th century, when Willow Creek was a small, tight-knit community. At the heart of the town stood Old Man Higgins' candy shop, a place where children would gather after school, their faces pressed against the glass as they ogled the colorful confections inside. Mr. Higgins, the shop's owner, was a kindly old man with a twinkle in his eye and a seemingly endless supply of candy. But beneath his cheerful demeanor, there was something unsettling about him, something that made parents uneasy even as their children adored him. As the years went by, strange occurrences began to plague the town. Children would go missing without a trace, vanishing into the night as if they had simply been swallowed by the darkness. Despite the community's best efforts, no one could find any clues as to where they had gone. The only thing that each missing child had in common was their love for Old Man Higgins' candy. Rumors began to circulate, whispers that the Candyman was not just a tale, but a real living nightmare. Some said that Mr. Higgins had made a deal with a dark entity, trading his soul for an endless supply of candy that he used to lure children into his clutches. Others believed that he was a creature from another realm, using his shop as a front to harvest the innocent souls of the town's children. The most chilling rumor, however, was that the candy itself was cursed, that each piece contained a fragment of the Candyman's malevolent spirit, and that those who ate it would soon find themselves drawn into his dark world. One fateful Halloween night, a group of children decided to test the legend. They dared each other to visit Old Man Higgins' candy shop after dark to see if the stories were true. Armed with flashlights and a bravado fueled by too many ghost stories, they made their way to the shop, their laughter echoing through the empty streets. As they approached the shop, they noticed that the lights were still on, casting an eerie glow through the windows. The door, usually locked tight after hours, stood slightly ajar as if inviting them in. The children hesitated, their earlier courage wavering as they exchanged nervous glances. But the dare had been made, and none of them wanted to be the first to back out. They stepped inside, the door creaking ominously as it swung shut behind them. The shop was exactly as they remembered it, rows of candy jars lining the shelves, the sweet scent of sugar filling the air. But something was off. The colors of the candy seemed duller, the air heavier, and the once comforting shop now felt like a trap. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the shop was plunged into darkness. The children screamed, their flashlights swinging wildly as they tried to find each other. In the midst of the chaos, they heard a low, raspy voice, one that sent chills down their spines. "Welcome, children. I've been expecting you." The voice was unmistakable. It was Old Man Higgins. But there was something different about it, something inhuman. The children froze, their eyes wide with terror, as they saw a shadowy figure emerge from behind the counter. It was Mr. Higgins, but not as they knew him. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and his smile was twisted, revealing sharp, pointed teeth. He stepped forward, holding out a tray of candy, each piece shimmering with an unnatural light. "Come now, don't be afraid. Have a piece. It's on the house." The children were paralyzed with fear, unable to move as the Candyman approached. One by one, they felt an overwhelming compulsion to reach out, to take the candy despite the terror gripping their hearts. As they did, the world around them began to warp and twist, the shop fading away into darkness as they were pulled into the Candyman's nightmarish realm. The next morning, the townsfolk awoke to find the candy shop gone, vanished without a trace. The children were never seen again, their disappearance adding to the growing legend of the Candyman. To this day, the story is told as a warning to children to never accept candy from strangers, especially not from the Candyman. But those who know the true horror of the tale understand that the Candyman is not just a legend. He is real, lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. The Candyman, a terrifying horror story. In the secluded, mist-shrouded town of Willow Creek, a foreboding tale, passed down through generations, cast a dark shadow over the otherwise tranquil community. It was the story of the Candyman, a mysterious figure cloaked in fear, who was said to appear whenever a child's sweet tooth became too much to bear. For those who indulged too deeply in his sugary offerings, a fate far worse than mere toothaches awaited. Some believed it was just a ghost story, a way to scare children into good behavior. But others knew better. They had seen the evidence, the old newspaper clippings, the tear-streaked faces of grieving parents, and the forgotten graves that dotted the edge of the town's cemetery. The tale began many years ago, when Willow Creek was little more than a cluster of cottages surrounded by dense woods. In those days, a man named Jonathan Higgins ran a small candy shop at the heart of the village. The shop was a haven for children, a place of wonder where every shelf overflowed with brightly colored sweets and sugary delights. Mr. Higgins, with his kind eyes and gentle smile, seemed to be the embodiment of joy to the town's youngsters. Yet, despite his warm exterior, there was something about him that unsettled the adults, a feeling that grew stronger as the years passed. Mr. Higgins had a secret, a dark, terrible secret that he had carried with him since his youth. As a young man, desperate for wealth and success, he had stumbled upon an ancient book filled with arcane rituals and forbidden knowledge. Among its pages, he found a spell that promised to make his candy irresistible, to ensure that every child who tasted it would crave more and more. But there was a price to be paid for such power. The spell required a sacrifice, a soul bound to the candy, one that would forever haunt those who consumed it. Driven by greed, Higgins performed the ritual, binding his own soul to the sweets he crafted. And from that day forward, the man was no longer just a confectioner. He had become the Candy Man, a being of pure malevolence, cursed to feed off the innocence of children. Over the decades, the candy shop became a place of legend. Children would beg their parents for just one more piece of Mr. Higgins' candy, unaware of the darkness that clung to each sweet. As more and more children succumbed to their cravings, strange things began to happen in Willow Creek. Children would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, plagued by horrific nightmares of being chased through endless mazes of candy by a shadowy figure. Some began to act out, becoming violent and erratic, their sweet smiles turning into twisted grins as they demanded more and more candy. Then, without warning, they would vanish, disappearing from their homes, leaving behind nothing but a sticky residue of sugar on their bedsheets. The town was gripped by fear. The elders whispered that the Candy Man had claimed his victims, that the missing children had been taken to a place where no one could reach them. Some said that if you stood in front of the candy shop at midnight and looked into the reflection of the window, you could see the faces of the lost children, their eyes wide with terror as they called out for help that would never come. Yet, despite these warnings, the allure of the candy was too great. Children continued to flock to the shop, unable to resist the siren call of the Candy Man's confections. One fateful winter, a new family moved to Willow Creek, unaware of the town's dark history. The Andersons had 3 children, Emily, Thomas, and Jacob, all of whom were enchanted by the tales of Mr. Higgins' legendary candy. Ignoring the warnings of their new neighbors, the Anderson children saved their pennies and eagerly awaited the day they could visit the shop. When they finally did, they were greeted by Mr. Higgins himself, who welcomed them with a smile that seemed to stretch too wide, his eyes glinting with something that was not quite human. The children were captivated by the candy, each piece more delicious than the last. They spent every spare moment at the shop, devouring sweets until their stomachs ached and their minds were clouded with sugar. But soon the nightmares began. Emily was the first to experience them, terrifying dreams where she found herself wandering through a labyrinth of candy, chased by a dark figure whose face she could never see. Then came Thomas, who started sleepwalking, his feet taking him closer and closer to the candy shop each night. Finally, Jacob, the youngest, became withdrawn and pale, refusing to eat anything but the candy he had hidden under his bed. Their parents, worried but unaware of the true danger, sought help from doctors and priests, but nothing could stop the relentless pull of the Candy Man. One by one, the children vanished, leaving the Andersons heartbroken and the town in despair. The candy shop, once a place of joy. The Candy Man, a terrifying horror story. In the dense, fog-covered forests that surrounded Willow Creek, there was a pervasive sense of unease that hung in the air, a feeling that something ancient and malevolent leapt just beyond the tree line. This unease was more than just superstition. It was a deeply rooted fear, passed down through generations, stemming from the harrowing tale of the Candy Man. The legend was not merely a cautionary story meant to keep children from misbehaving. It was a warning, a reminder that evil could take many forms, even something as innocent as candy. The origins of the Candy Man were shrouded in mystery. Some said he had once been a respected member of the community, a man of wealth and influence who had fallen from grace due to his insatiable greed. Others whispered that he had always been something else entirely, an ancient spirit or demon that had taken on human form to ensnare the unwary. What everyone agreed upon was that the Candyman had made a pact with dark forces, trading his humanity for the ability to create the most irresistible sweets, confections that would drive those who tasted them to madness and beyond. As the legend goes, the Candyman did not start his work in Willow Creek, but in a far-off village that no longer exists on any map. In that forgotten place, he had perfected his craft, creating candies so delectable that children would come from miles around just to taste them. The village prospered at first, as people flocked to the Candyman's shop, spending their money freely and indulging in the sugary delights. But soon, strange things began to happen. Children who ate too much of the candy started to change. They became listless, their eyes growing dull, their laughter turning into eerie, hollow echoes. They spoke of strange dreams, of wandering through endless candy landscapes where the Candyman ruled as king, and where escape was impossible. The adults of the village, oblivious to the true danger, dismissed these tales as childish fantasies, but when the first child disappeared, their complacency turned to panic. Search parties were organized, and the village combed the surrounding forests and fields, but the child was never found. Over the next few weeks, more children vanished, each one disappearing without a trace. The village, once vibrant and full of life, fell into despair. Shops closed, homes were abandoned, and eventually, the village itself was swallowed by the encroaching wilderness, its name and location lost to time. The Candyman had moved on, leaving behind nothing but whispers and the occasional ghostly scent of sugar on the wind. It was after this that the Candyman arrived in Willow Creek, his reputation preceding him like a dark cloud. By the time he opened his shop, the townsfolk were already worried, though they tried to hide their fears behind forced smiles and polite conversation. The children, of course, were less cautious. They were drawn to the shop like moths to a flame, their eyes wide with wonder as they beheld the mountains of candy on display. The Candyman greeted them all with that same unsettling smile, offering them free samples, knowing full well that once they had tasted his creations, they would be his forever. As the years went by, the Candyman became an integral part of Willow Creek. His shop was the centerpiece of every holiday celebration, his candies a staple at every birthday party. Yet the town's unease never truly faded. Parents noticed that their children, once vibrant and full of life, were becoming withdrawn, obsessed with the candy in a way that was unnatural. Some children began to develop strange habits, hoarding candy in secret, refusing to eat anything else, even as their bodies wasted away. When the first child from Willow Creek disappeared, the town's darkest fears were realized. The old tales were true, and the Candyman was not just a purveyor of sweets. He was a predator, feeding off the souls of the innocent. The townspeople were terrified, but they were also powerless. No one dared confront the Candyman directly, for the fear of what he might do was too great. Instead, they began to distance themselves from the shop, forbidding their children from going near it. The Candyman noticed, of course, but he did not seem concerned. He continued to open his shop every day, his smile never faltering, his shelves always stocked with the most enticing confections. But the town's resolve could only hold for so long. Eventually, curiosity, greed, or perhaps some darker compulsion would drive another child to his door, and the cycle would begin anew. In the years that followed, Willow Creek became a ghost town, its streets empty, its buildings abandoned. The Candyman's shop was the last to close, its windows boarded up, its door sealed with heavy chains. But even as the town lay in ruins, the legend of the Candyman continued to grow. The Candyman, a terrifying horror story. In the annals of Willow Creek's dark history, the story of the Candyman stands as a chilling reminder of the horrors that can arise from seemingly innocent indulgences. The legend, whispered in hushed tones around campfires and retold by grandparents to wide-eyed grandchildren, has only grown more terrifying with each retelling. But few know the full extent of the horror, the true depth of the evil that the Candyman represents. A tale so dark that even the bravest souls hesitate to speak it aloud. The story begins long before Willow Creek was a town, in a time when the land was wild and untamed, inhabited by a small, close-knit community that lived in harmony with the natural world. Among them was a young man named Samuel Grimm, a skilled herbalist who was well respected for his knowledge of the land's medicinal plants and healing properties. Samuel was known for his kind heart and gentle nature, always willing to help those in need with his remedies. But Samuel had a secret, one that would eventually lead to his downfall. In the depths of the forest, hidden away from prying eyes, Samuel discovered an ancient twisted tree, its gnarled branches heavy with strange, luminescent fruit. The tree was unlike anything he had ever seen, and its fruit emitted a sweet, intoxicating aroma that filled the air with an almost magical odor. Samuel, curious and perhaps a bit reckless, took one of the fruits and brought it back to his small cottage, eager to study its properties. As he experimented with the fruit, Samuel realized that it possessed extraordinary powers. When mixed with sugar and other ingredients, it created a candy that was not only delicious, but also had the ability to heal the sick and cure the afflicted. Over time, Samuel perfected his recipe, creating candies that could cure any ailment, from the common cold to more severe diseases. The people of the community were amazed by Samuel's creations, and soon, word of his miraculous candies spread far and wide. But the fruit from the tree was not without its dangers. Samuel began to notice that those who consumed his candies, while healed of their physical ailments, began to exhibit strange behaviors. They became obsessed with the candy, unable to stop eating it, even as it began to take a toll on their bodies and minds. The once healthy individuals grew pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow and their spirits diminished, as if the very essence of their souls was being drained away with each bite. Disturbed by what he had unleashed, Samuel tried to stop making the candies, but it was too late. The demand had become overwhelming, and the people, desperate for the sweets that had brought them relief, turned on him. They threatened to expose his secret if he did not continue to produce the candies. Fearing for his life, Samuel returned to the tree, harvesting more of the cursed fruit, but with each passing day, the tree's influence over him grew stronger. The once kind herbalist became consumed by the power of the tree, his body and mind twisted by the dark magic that coursed through its roots. He no longer cared about healing. All that mattered was feeding the insatiable hunger that now consumed him. Samuel Grimm was no more. In his place stood the Candyman, a creature of pure evil, driven by a desire to spread his cursed confections far and wide. As the Candyman, Samuel began to wander from town to town, his once beloved candies now tools of corruption and despair. Wherever he went, he left a trail of destruction in his wake, towns falling into ruin as their inhabitants succumbed to the sweet poison he offered. Children were the most susceptible, drawn to the candies like moths to a flame, their innocent souls devoured by the dark magic that infused each piece. When the Candyman arrived in Willow Creek, the town was already teetering on the edge of collapse, ravaged by disease and poverty. The townspeople, desperate for any kind of relief, welcomed him with open arms, eager to partake in the sweets that promised to ease their suffering. But they soon discovered, as others had before them, that the price of the Candyman's generosity was far too high. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Children who had always been full of life and energy began to grow listless, their eyes losing their sparkle as they became increasingly fixated on the candy. They stopped playing outside, preferring to stay indoors, where they could eat their sweets in secret, away from the watchful eyes of their parents. Then came the nightmares, terrifying visions of dark forests and shadowy figures, of endless mazes filled with candy that never satisfied their hunger. The children awoke screaming, but no matter how much their parents comforted them, the fear never went away. As the children grew weaker, the Candyman grew stronger. His shop, once a place of joy and wonder, became a place of dread, its shelves lined with candies that no one dared to touch. The townspeople, realizing too late the true nature of the Candyman, tried to stop him, but he was always one step ahead, his twisted smile mocking their futile efforts. The final straw came when the first child disappeared. A little girl named Lily, who had been one of the Candyman's most frequent customers. Her parents, frantic with worry, searched the town from top to bottom, but there was no sign of her. The only clue was a trail of sticky, sugary residue leading from her bedroom to the edge of the forest, where it disappeared into the underbrush. The townspeople, now fully aware of the horror that had descended upon them, gathered at the edge of the forest, torches in hand, ready to confront the Candyman and put an end to his reign of terror. But the forest was vast and treacherous, filled with ancient trees that seemed to shift and change with each step. The Candyman knew the forest better than anyone, and he led the townspeople deeper and deeper into its heart, where the ancient tree that had started it all still stood. It was here that the final confrontation took place, the townspeople facing off against the Candyman in a desperate battle for their lives and the lives of their children. But the Candyman was no longer just a man. He had become something else entirely, a creature of darkness and shadow, his body twisted and deformed by the power of the tree. He fought with a ferocity that no one could have anticipated, his twisted laughter echoing through the trees as he cut down those who dared to oppose him. In the end, it was not strength or courage that defeated the Candyman, but the very thing he had sought to corrupt, love. As the last of the townspeople fell, a young boy, no more than 10 years old, stepped forward, holding in his hand a single piece of candy that his mother had given him before she died. The boy, tears streaming down his face, offered the candy to the Candyman, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Please," he said, "take this and leave us alone." For a moment, the Candyman hesitated, his twisted smile faltering as he looked at the boy. In that brief moment, the man who had once been Samuel Grim resurfaced, his humanity struggling to break free from the darkness that had consumed him. But the tree, sensing its control slipping, tightened its grip, and the Candyman lashed out, striking the boy down with a single brutal blow. But it was too late. The boy's act of love had broken the spell, and the power of the tree began to wane. The forest, once alive with dark magic, began to crumble, its ancient trees withering and dying as the Candyman's power faded. The Candyman, now nothing more than a twisted, broken shell of his former self, screamed in rage and despair as he was consumed by the darkness he had once wielded, his body dissolving into nothingness as the tree that had given him life was finally destroyed. In the aftermath, the town of Willow Creek was left in ruins, its people broken and grieving for the lives that had been lost. The candy shop was destroyed, its remains buried under the rubble of the fallen trees, and the legend of the Candyman became just that, a legend, a story to be told to future generations as a warning of the dangers of greed and the corrupting power of dark magic. But some say that the Candyman is not truly gone, that his spirit lingers in the shadows, waiting for the day when the curse will be reborn, and he will once again rise to spread his cursed confections to a new generation. And so, the people of Willow Creek live in constant vigilance, always watching, always wary, lest the Candyman return to claim more innocent souls. If you ever find yourself wandering through the woods near Willow Creek, and you stumble upon a tree that seems out of place, its branches twisted and its fruit glowing with an unnatural light, turn and run as fast as you can. For the Candyman may still be out there, waiting for his next victim, and once he has you in his grasp, there will be no escape. The Candyman, a terrifying horror story. Long after the events that led to the fall of Willow Creek, the story of the Candyman continued to haunt the region. His tale became a dark fable, a ghost story told around campfires and whispered among children who dared each other to say his name 3 times in front of a mirror. Yet, as the years passed and the town's ruins were overtaken by the relentless march of nature, the Candyman faded from memory, until a series of strange events rekindled the terror that had once gripped the town. It was said that those who ventured too close to the forgotten site of Willow Creek at night would feel an overwhelming sense of dread, as though unseen eyes were watching from the darkness. The forest, once vibrant with life, had become eerily silent, the trees twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out like gnarled hands. And on nights when the moon was full, a sweet, sickly scent would waft through the air, so strong that it could turn the stomachs of even the most hardened travelers. It was on one such night that a group of urban explorers, thrill-seekers looking for an adrenaline rush, decided to investigate the ruins of Willow Creek. They had heard the legends, of course, but dismissed them as nothing more than superstitions, old wives' tales meant to keep people away from the forest. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and bravado, they set out to document their adventure, eager to uncover the secrets of the abandoned town. The journey to Willow Creek was longer and more treacherous than they had anticipated. The forest seemed to close in around them as they walked, the once clear path becoming overgrown and difficult to navigate. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as though the very air was thick with malevolence. The sweet scent that filled their nostrils only heightened their unease, but they pressed on, determined to reach the town before midnight. When they finally arrived, the ruins of Willow Creek were barely recognizable. Nature had reclaimed much of the town, with trees growing through the remnants of buildings and ivy creeping over crumbling walls. The explorers fanned out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched for anything of interest. It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for: the remains of the candy shop, its facade half collapsed, the sign above the door barely legible. As they approached the shop, a strange feeling washed over them, an almost irresistible urge to enter, to see what lay beyond the rotting wooden door. Ignoring the warning signs that their instincts were screaming at them, they pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was thick with the cloying scent of sugar, so strong that it made their heads spin. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, and the floor creaked ominously underfoot. The interior of the shop was eerily intact, as though time had frozen it in the moment of its abandonment. Jars of candy, now long expired and covered in a fine layer of dust, lined the shelves. The cash register sat on the counter, its keys tarnished with age, and in the center of the room, on a table that seemed out of place, was a single piece of candy, a small, brightly wrapped bonbon that looked as fresh as the day it was made. One of the explorers, a young man named Eddie, couldn't resist. He reached out, drawn to the candy as though compelled by an unseen force. His friends urged him to stop, their voices trembling with fear, but it was too late. The moment Eddie touched the candy, the entire shop seemed to come alive. The walls shuddered, the floor groaned, and the sweet scent intensified until it was almost suffocating. Before anyone could react, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. Panic set in as they tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. The shop was no longer just a decaying ruin. It had become a living entity, a prison designed to ensnare its victims. The explorers could feel the presence of something malevolent, something ancient and hungry, watching them from the shadows. And then they heard it, a low, raspy voice that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the shop. "Welcome to my shop, children. I've been waiting for you." The voice was unmistakable, filled with a sinister glee that sent shivers down their spines. The Candy Man had returned. As the voice echoed through the shop, the explorers realized with growing horror that the candies on the shelves were not what they seemed. The once colorful confections began to writhe and squirm, taking on twisted, grotesque shapes that defied description. The jars shattered, spilling their contents onto the floor, where they slithered and crawled toward the trapped intruders. Desperation took hold as the explorers fought to escape, but there was no way out. The walls seemed to close in on them, the shop shrinking as the candy creatures advanced. Eddie, still clutching the cursed bonbon, was the first to fall. The candy melted in his hand, its sticky sweetness turning to acid as it burned through his flesh. He screamed, a sound that echoed in the ears of his friends long after they had managed to pry the door open and flee into the night. But their ordeal was far from over. The Candy Man was not content with merely letting them go. As they ran through the forest, they could hear his laughter, a deep, chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The trees twisted and writhed, their branches reaching out to grab at the fleeing survivors. The path back to safety was gone, replaced by an endless maze of candy cane trees and licorice vines, all dripping with a sickly sweet sap that oozed onto the ground. One by one, the explorers were picked off, dragged screaming into the darkness by the candy creatures that had once been so tempting. Their cameras captured the horrors they faced, but the footage would never be found. By the time the search party arrived weeks later, there was no trace of the explorers or the candy shop. The forest had swallowed everything, leaving behind nothing but a lingering scent of sugar in the air. The story of the Candy Man once again spread through the region, now with even more terrifying details. No longer was he just a legend to scare children. He was a very real and deadly threat. People avoided the area around Willow Creek like the plague, but the Candy Man's influence began to seep into other towns. Reports of missing children, strange candies appearing on doorsteps, and sightings of a shadowy figure with glowing eyes began to surface in neighboring communities. Those who encountered the Candy Man and lived to tell the tale spoke of a world unlike any other, a twisted, nightmarish landscape where every turn led deeper into madness. They described candy forests where the trees whispered dark secrets, rivers of chocolate that bubbled with an unseen malevolence, and skies filled with swirls of cotton candy that rained down drops of poison. In this world, the Candyman reigned supreme, a king of his own sugary hell, where the innocent and the unwary were lured by their sweet tooth into an eternity of torment. Despite the growing terror, there were those who sought to confront the Candyman. A group of paranormal investigators, determined to rid the world of his evil once and for all, ventured into the forest with the most advanced equipment and the bravest hearts. But the Candyman was no ordinary spirit. He was a creature born of dark magic and fed by the greed and gluttony of those he ensnared. The investigators' technology failed them, their courage turned to dust, and they too became victims of the endless hunger that drove the Candyman. The town of Willow Creek remained lost, but its story continued to spread, a warning to all who might be tempted by the allure of the Candyman. And as long as there were those who sought out his sweets, who couldn't resist the siren call of his confections, the Candyman would never truly be gone. He would wait, patiently, in the dark corners of the world, ready to offer his cursed candy to the next unwitting soul who stumbled upon his shop. If you ever find yourself walking alone in the woods, and you catch a whiff of something sweet in the air, remember the tale of the Candyman. Resist the temptation, turn back, and don't look back. For if you find yourself drawn into his world, you may never find your way out. And once you've tasted his candy, he'll never let you go. The Candyman, a terrifying horror story. Deep in the heart of the forgotten forest that once surrounded Willow Creek, the legend of the Candyman endured, growing darker with each passing year. Though the town had long since been reclaimed by nature, its memory persisted in the whispers of those who lived nearby, in the chilling accounts of travelers who dared to venture too close, and in the nightmares of those who had heard the tale. The forest, now known as the Cursed Wood, was avoided by all but the most foolhardy. Its trees, twisted and ancient, seemed to loom over those who entered, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even sunlight struggled to penetrate. The air was heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and something sweeter, more insidious, a lingering aroma of sugar that clung to the senses like a memory that refused to fade. Over the years, many had attempted to uncover the truth behind the Candyman. Scholars, adventurers, and thrill-seekers alike had delved into the dark history of Willow Creek, piecing together fragments of old stories, journal entries, and forgotten records. They uncovered tales of Samuel Grimm, the once kind herbalist who had become the monster known as the Candyman, of the cursed tree whose fruit had given birth to his unholy confections, and of the countless souls who had fallen victim to his dark temptations. But there was one story that had been lost to time, buried deep in the annals of Willow Creek's history. A story that held the key to the Candyman's ultimate downfall. Long before Samuel Grimm had discovered the cursed tree, there had been another who had come into contact with its dark power. Her name was Eliza Thorne, a healer and wise woman who lived on the outskirts of the village. Eliza was feared and respected in equal measure. Her knowledge of herbs and potions was unmatched, but she was also known to dabble in the arcane, and it was whispered that she had made pacts with spirits and demons to gain her power. One autumn evening, as Eliza was gathering herbs in the forest, she came upon the twisted tree, its branches heavy with the strange, glowing fruit. Drawn by its unnatural beauty, she approached, but unlike Samuel, Eliza sensed the evil that emanated from the tree. She knew that this was no ordinary plant. It was a conduit for dark forces, a nexus of power that had been growing for centuries, feeding on the land and its people. Eliza took a single fruit, but instead of consuming it or using it in her potions, she performed a ritual, binding the tree's power to herself. In doing so, she became its guardian, tasked with keeping its evil in check. For years, she succeeded, using her knowledge and magic to prevent the tree's influence from spreading beyond the forest. But as time passed and Eliza grew older, her power waned, and the tree's influence began to creep back into the world. By the time Samuel Grimm discovered the tree, Eliza was a frail, elderly woman, her once formidable power nearly spent. She tried to warn Samuel of the dangers, but he was too blinded by greed and ambition to listen. In the end, Samuel's fall to darkness was swift, and with it, the curse of the Candyman was born. But Eliza had not given up. She knew that the tree could not be destroyed by conventional means. It was too old, too powerful. Instead, she crafted a talisman, a small, intricately carved amulet made from the wood of the tree itself. This talisman, infused with Eliza's remaining power, could sever the bond between the tree and the Candyman, rendering him vulnerable, perhaps even mortal. Eliza hid the talisman deep within the forest, in a place known only to her, where it would remain until the day someone brave enough, or desperate enough, would come seeking it. But with her death, the knowledge of the talisman's location was lost, and it became little more than a forgotten relic, its purpose and power obscured by the passage of time. The years turned to decades, and the story of Eliza Thorne and her talisman faded into obscurity, overshadowed by the more immediate horrors of the Candyman. But as the legend persisted, so too did the whispers of a way to defeat him. A glimmer of hope buried beneath layers of fear and despair. It was not until many years later, when the tale of the Candyman reached the ears of a young woman named Clara, that the talisman was rediscovered. Clara was the last descendant of Eliza Thorne, though she knew nothing of her ancestors' legacy. She had grown up in a neighboring town, hearing the stories of the Candyman like everyone else, but she had always felt a strange connection to the tale, as though it called to her from across the ages. Driven by a sense of duty and a desire to protect those she loved, Clara began to research the history of Willow Creek. She pored over old texts, journals, and records, piecing together the story of her ancestor and the cursed tree. When she finally uncovered the truth about the talisman, she knew what she had to do. Armed with little more than her determination and the knowledge passed down through Eliza's bloodline, Clara ventured into the cursed wood in search of the talisman. The journey was fraught with danger. The forest was alive with the dark energy of the tree, its twisted branches reaching out to ensnare her, its roots tripping her at every step. The air was thick with the scent of sugar, sweet and cloying, threatening to overwhelm her senses. But Clara pressed on, guided by the whispers of her ancestors, until she reached the heart of the forest. There, hidden beneath the gnarled roots of the cursed tree, she found the talisman, a small wooden amulet, worn smooth by time, but still pulsing with the faint glow of Eliza's magic. The moment Clara touched the talisman, she felt a surge of power, a connection to the past that filled her with both strength and fear. With the talisman in hand, Clara knew that she had the means to confront the Candyman. But she also knew that the battle would not be easy. The Candyman had grown powerful over the years, his influence spreading far beyond the forest, reaching into the minds and hearts of those who were drawn to his sweets. To defeat him, Clara would need to face him in his own domain, the twisted, nightmarish world he had created, where the rules of reality no longer applied. On the night of the full moon, when the Candyman was at his strongest, Clara returned to the ruins of Willow Creek. The forest was alive with the sounds of unseen creatures, and the air was thick with the scent of sugar. As she approached the old candy shop, now little more than a decaying shell, she felt the talisman grow warm in her hand, its power resonating with the dark energy that surrounded her. Inside the shop, the air was heavy with the sickly sweet smell of candy, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Clara could feel the presence of the Candyman all around her, a malevolent force that watched her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then he appeared. The Candyman was no longer the man he had once been. His body was a twisted mockery of humanity, his skin pale and stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and his mouth, filled with jagged, rotting teeth, curled into a cruel smile as he regarded Clara with a mix of amusement and malice. "Welcome, child," he hissed, his voice echoing through the shop. "I've been expecting you." Clara stood her ground, clutching the talisman tightly. "I know who you are," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her heart. "And I know how to stop you." The Candyman laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Clara's spine. "You think you can defeat me with that trinket? You are a fool, just like your ancestor." But Clara was undeterred. She raised the talisman, its glow intensifying as she channeled her will into it. The Candyman's laughter faltered as he felt the talisman's power wash over him, weakening the bond between him and the cursed tree that had given him life. "No," he screamed, his voice filled with rage and desperation. "You cannot do this. I am eternal. I am." Before he could finish, Clara unleashed the full power of the talisman. The shop around them exploded with light, and the walls began to crumble as the dark magic that had sustained the Candyman was ripped apart. The twisted, nightmarish world he had created began to unravel, the candy creatures dissolving into nothingness, the sweet scent of sugar fading into the cool, clean air of the night. The Candyman shrieked in agony as his body was torn apart by the talisman's power. His form wavered, flickered, and then dissolved into a cloud of dark smoke that was quickly carried away by the wind. The last thing Clara heard before the Candyman vanished was his voice, now weak and distant, whispering a curse that echoed in her mind. "You may have defeated me, but the darkness will never be vanquished. It will return, and when it does, you will not be there to stop it." With the Candyman defeated, the curse that had plagued Willow Creek for generations was finally lifted. The forest, once twisted and malevolent, began to heal, its trees straightening, its paths clearing as the dark magic faded away. The ruins of the candy shop crumbled to dust, leaving behind nothing but a patch of bare earth where the talisman lay, its power spent. Clara, exhausted but victorious, left the cursed wood and returned to her town. The story of her battle with the Candyman quickly spread, and she became a hero in the eyes of those who had lived in fear of the legend for so long. The Candyman, a terrifying horror story. Years had passed since Clara's confrontation with the Candyman, but the scars of that night ran deep in the fabric of the region. Though the cursed woods slowly returned to a semblance of natural beauty, with flowers blooming where darkness once reigned, the tale of the Candyman remained an indelible mark on the collective memory of those who lived nearby. The story, retold with chilling embellishments, became a cautionary tale, a warning whispered to children and travelers alike. Yet, even in the quietest of places, evil has a way of seeping back in. Far from Willow Creek, in a bustling city where legends seemed to hold no sway, another chapter of the Candyman's dark legacy was about to unfold. The city was a place of industry and progress, where the old ways were forgotten in favor of new technologies and modern conveniences. But beneath the surface of its glittering skyscrapers and busy streets, there lurked a hunger, a greed that echoed the very same desires that had once driven Samuel Grimm to his doom. In this city there was a man named Victor Kane, a wealthy entrepreneur who had made his fortune in the food industry. Victor was known for his innovative products, his empire built on the backs of the countless factories that churned out processed snacks and sweets that filled store shelves across the country. But Victor was not satisfied. He craved more wealth, more power, more success, and he was willing to do anything to achieve it. Victor had heard the stories of the Candyman, dismissing them as nothing more than rural superstition, but one tale in particular caught his attention, the story of the cursed tree and the powerful confections it could produce. Victor became obsessed with the idea of finding the tree, believing that its fruit could be the key to creating a new line of products that would dominate the market, cementing his legacy as the greatest confectioner of all time. He poured resources into researching the legend, hiring teams of historians and explorers to comb through the archives and search for any trace of the tree's location. Months turned into years, and Victor's obsession grew, driving away friends and family as he became more and more consumed by his quest. His company suffered as he diverted more and more funds into the search, but Victor didn't care. He was on the verge of a breakthrough, and nothing else mattered. Finally, after years of searching, Victor's team uncovered an ancient map hidden away in a forgotten corner of a private collection. The map, weathered and nearly illegible, appeared to show the location of the tree deep in the heart of the cursed wood. Elated, Victor immediately set out for the forest, ignoring the warnings of his advisors and the fears of those who still remembered the tale of the Candyman. When Victor arrived at the edge of the cursed wood, he was undeterred by the foreboding atmosphere. The trees, though no longer as twisted as they once were, still bore the marks of the dark magic that had once pervaded the land. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant call of unseen creatures. As Victor ventured deeper into the forest, the modern world seemed to fall away, replaced by an oppressive sense of dread. But Victor pressed on, driven by his insatiable desire for the tree's fruit. After hours of searching, he finally found it, the ancient gnarled tree, its branches heavy with the same glowing fruit that had once lured Samuel Grimm to his doom. Victor approached the tree with a mixture of awe and greed. The fruit was unlike anything he had ever seen, its sweet scent intoxicating, its glow mesmerizing. Without hesitation, Victor plucked one of the fruits and bit into it, savoring the taste as the juice ran down his chin. The fruit was everything he had hoped for, sweet, rich, and filled with an energy that made him feel invincible. But as Victor savored his prize, he failed to notice the shadows gathering around him, the way the light dimmed and the air grew cold. He was so focused on the fruit that he didn't hear the low, rasping voice that began to whisper in the back of his mind, urging him to take more, to consume everything the tree had to offer. The voice grew louder, more insistent, until it was all Victor could hear. He reached for another fruit and another, devouring them with a hunger that could not be sated. The more he ate, the more the darkness seemed to close in around him, until the forest was nothing but a blur of shadows and twisted shapes. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the voice fell silent. Victor stumbled back, dropping the fruit he had been about to eat. The world around him shifted, the forest fading away to be replaced by a nightmarish landscape of candy-coated horrors. The trees were made of sugar, their branches dripping with syrupy sap that oozed onto the ground. The sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds, shot through with veins of sickly sweet pink and blue, and the air was thick with the scent of burning sugar. Before Victor could comprehend what was happening, he saw him, the Candyman. No longer a man, but a monstrous figure of twisted flesh and bone, his body a grotesque parody of humanity, his face a mask of cruel delight. His eyes, glowing with a sickly yellow light, locked onto Victor, and his mouth stretched into a smile that was all sharp teeth and malevolent glee. "Welcome," the Candyman hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You have tasted the fruit, and now you are mine." Victor tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. The ground beneath him seemed to turn to sticky molasses, holding him in place as the Candyman approached. Desperation clawed at Victor's mind as he struggled to break free, but it was no use. The more he fought, the deeper he sank into the sugary mire. The Candyman reached out his hand, a twisted, claw-like appendage, brushing against Victor's cheek. The touch sent a jolt of agony through Victor's body, and he screamed, the sound echoing through the nightmarish landscape. "You sought power," the Candyman whispered, his voice filling Victor's mind. "But power always comes with a price." As the Candyman's words washed over him, Victor's body began to change. His skin grew tight, cracking and splitting as it hardened into a brittle, sugary shell. His eyes glazed over, turning a sickly shade of yellow, and his mouth twisted into a grotesque grin that mirrored the Candyman's own. Victor's thoughts, once so focused and driven, were replaced by an overwhelming hunger, a need to consume that drowned out all else. With a final, shuddering breath, Victor Kane ceased to exist. In his place stood a new creation, a servant of the Candyman, bound to the twisted world of sugar and darkness that now claimed him. The Candyman smiled, satisfied with his latest conquest. His world, once nearly destroyed by Clara's talisman, was now stronger than ever, fed by the greed and desire of those who could not resist the lure of his cursed confections. He turned away, leaving Victor, now a mindless candy creature, to wander the endless, sugary landscape, searching for something to satisfy the hunger that would never be sated. Back in the city, Victor Kane's disappearance was noted but quickly forgotten. His company, already struggling, fell into bankruptcy, its assets sold off to competitors who had no knowledge of the dark forces that had claimed its founder. But in the dark corners of the city, in forgotten alleys and abandoned warehouses, strange things began to happen. Children reported seeing strange figures lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, their mouths twisted into grotesque smiles. Sweets appeared on doorsteps, wrapped in brightly colored paper, their origins unknown. Those who ate the sweets were never seen again. The legend of the Candyman spread once more, now not confined to the rural areas but seeping into the cities, where the modern world's greed and ambition made fertile ground for his dark influence. And with each new victim, the Candyman grew stronger, his world expanding, his hunger never ending. In the end, the story of the Candyman is a reminder that some evils cannot be destroyed, only contained. As long as there are those who seek power and wealth at any cost, the Candyman will be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim his next victim. His sweets, tempting and deadly, will continue to find their way into the hands of the unwary, and his curse will endure, spreading like a dark stain across the world. So beware the sweet scent of sugar in the air, the brightly wrapped candies that appear from nowhere, and the figure that watches from the shadows, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. For the candy man is always hungry, and he is always waiting. And once you've tasted his candy, there is no escape. The Candy Man, a terrifying horror story. As the years passed, the tale of the Candy Man became an urban legend known far and wide, whispered in every corner of society. Children recited it on playgrounds, daring each other to chant his name in darkened bathrooms. Parents used it to scare their little ones into behaving, warning them to avoid taking sweets from strangers. But the true horror of the Candy Man was something far more insidious, something that lay beneath the surface of these tales, a creeping darkness that fed on fear, greed, and desire. The influence of the Candy Man had spread far beyond the cursed wood and the decaying ruins of Willow Creek. His dark legacy now reached into the very heart of modern life, where people were driven by their cravings, both literal and metaphorical. As the legend grew, so did the Candy Man's power, finding new ways to manifest in an increasingly digital world. In a small suburban town, nestled between the anonymity of the city and the stillness of the countryside, a new kind of candy shop opened its doors. It appeared overnight in a dilapidated strip mall, its windows gleaming with an inviting warmth that contrasted starkly with the cold, grey exterior of the surrounding buildings. The shop was called Sugar Rush, and it promised the most exquisite sweets anyone had ever tasted. No one knew where the shop had come from. There was no record of its construction, no advertisements, and no grand opening. It was simply there one morning, its doors wide open, inviting customers to step inside and indulge. The interior was a wonderland of candy. Brightly colored jars filled with every imaginable confection lined the shelves, the air thick with the intoxicating scent of sugar. At the counter stood a man, his features obscured by the shadows, his smile warm but unsettling. The shop quickly became the talk of the town. People flocked to Sugar Rush to experience the delights it offered, and soon the once quiet suburb was buzzing with excitement. The candy was unlike anything anyone had ever tasted. Each piece was a burst of flavor, so rich and satisfying that it left customers craving more. Word spread quickly, and before long, people were driving in from miles away just to visit the mysterious shop. But as more and more people indulged in the sweets from Sugar Rush, strange things began to happen. It started subtly. People found themselves thinking about the candy constantly, unable to focus on anything else. They began to hoard it, hiding it from their friends and family, consuming it in secret late at night. Then came the dreams, vivid, unsettling visions of a dark, twisted world made entirely of candy, where a figure with glowing eyes and a sinister smile watched from the shadows. One by one, those who had visited Sugar Rush began to change. They became irritable, paranoid, and obsessed with the candy. They lost weight, their skin grew pale, and dark circles formed under their eyes. They stopped going to work, stopped caring for their families, and spent every waking moment in search of more sweets. Some began to see things, strange, distorted shapes in the corners of their vision, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, urging them to consume more and more. It wasn't long before the disappearances began. The first was a young mother, last seen leaving the shop with a large bag of candy. Her husband found the bag in their home, but she was nowhere to be found. The police were called, but they could find no trace of her. Then a local businessman vanished, followed by a teenager, then an elderly woman. Each time, the only clue left behind was a half-empty bag of candy from Sugar Rush. Panic began to spread through the town as more people disappeared, and those who had frequented the shop became increasingly unhinged. The once lively community was now gripped by fear, with neighbors turning on each other, accusing one another of hiding the truth about the disappearances. But no one knew what was really happening, and those who might have had answers were too far gone to speak. In the midst of the chaos, a young woman named Rachel began to investigate. Rachel had grown up in the town and had heard the stories of the Candy Man as a child, though she had never believed them. But as the disappearances mounted and the strange behavior of the townspeople escalated, she began to suspect that there might be some truth to the old legend. Determined to uncover the truth, Rachel started digging into the history of Sugar Rush and its mysterious owner. What she found chilled her to the bone. The shop, it seemed, had appeared in other towns before, always without warning, always drawing people in with its irresistible sweets. And each time, After a series of strange disappearances and bizarre behavior, the shop would vanish as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives and unanswered questions. The descriptions of the shop's owner varied, but there was one detail that remained consistent: the man's eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, and his smile wide and sinister. Rachel knew she was dealing with something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. She remembered the old tales of the Candyman, of how he had been defeated once before by a brave woman who had used a talisman to sever his connection to the cursed tree. But Rachel had no such talisman, no ancient magic to protect her. All she had was her determination to save her town and the knowledge that she might not survive the encounter. Despite the danger, Rachel decided to confront the owner of Sugar Rush. Late one night, she made her way to the shop, its windows still aglow with a warm, inviting light. The town was eerily quiet, the streets empty, as though the very life had been drained from the place. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the door, which swung open of its own accord, welcoming her inside. The shop was empty, save for the man behind the counter. He looked up as she entered, his smile widening as if he had been expecting her. His eyes, glowing with that unnatural light, locked onto hers, and Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "Good evening," the man said, his voice smooth and honeyed. "Can I interest you in something sweet?" Rachel fought the urge to flee, knowing that this was her only chance to stop him. She stepped forward, her voice steady as she spoke. "I know who you are," she said, "and I know what you've done." The man's smile didn't falter. If anything, it seemed to grow more amused. "Do you now?" he replied. "And what do you plan to do about it?" Rachel hesitated, realizing she had no real plan. But she couldn't back down now. She took a deep breath and continued. "You're the Candyman," she said. "You lure people in with your sweets and then you take them. You destroy their lives. But I'm not going to let you do that here." The Candyman chuckled, a low, menacing sound that echoed through the empty shop. "Brave words," he said, "but you're too late. The seed has already been planted, and soon it will bear fruit. You cannot stop what is coming." Rachel felt a surge of fear, but she pushed it down, refusing to let him see her doubt. "Maybe I can't stop you," she said, "but I can expose you. I can warn people, tell them what you are. You won't be able to hide anymore." The Candyman's eyes narrowed, his smile fading slightly. "And who will believe you?" he asked. "You're just one woman, alone in a world that has long forgotten the old stories. They'll think you're mad, and even if they do believe you, it won't matter. The hunger is too strong. They will come to me, no matter what you say." For a moment, Rachel felt a wave of despair. He was right. Who would believe her? The town was already under his spell, and even if she could convince them of the truth, would they be strong enough to resist the temptation? But then she remembered something her grandmother had told her when she was a child, a story about how the power of the Candyman was rooted in fear and greed. If people could resist those urges, they could weaken him. With renewed determination, Rachel met the Candyman's gaze. "You may be powerful," she said, "but you're not invincible. You feed on fear and desire, but people can choose to be strong. They can choose not to give in." The Candyman's smile faded completely, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You think you can turn them against me?" he asked, his voice now filled with a quiet fury. "You think they have the strength to resist? We shall see." Without warning, the Candyman lunged at Rachel, his form shifting into something monstrous, a being of shadow and smoke, his eyes burning like embers in the darkness. Rachel stumbled back, her heart pounding, but she refused to run. She knew this was a battle she couldn't win with strength alone. Instead, she focused on the one thing that might save her: hope. She thought of the people she had grown up with, the friends and neighbors who had already fallen under the Candyman's spell. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her the old stories, and of Clara, the woman who had once defeated the Candyman with nothing but her courage and a talisman. And she thought of herself, standing alone in the face of a nightmare, determined to save her town. "Stop!" Rachel shouted, her voice ringing out in the darkness. "You don't have to do this. You don't have to give in to him." The Candyman paused, his form flickering as though something had disrupted his power. For a brief moment, the human face of the shopkeeper reappeared, a look of uncertainty in his glowing eyes. Rachel seized the moment, stepping forward with newfound confidence. "Fight him," she urged. You're stronger than he is. You don't need his power. You can be free." The candy man let out a roar of rage, but his form wavered, the darkness around him thinning. The glow in his eyes dimmed, and for the first time, Rachel saw a hint of fear in them. But it wasn't enough. The candy man was too powerful, too deeply rooted in the desires and fears of the people he had ensnared. He lunged at Rachel again, his form solidifying, his eyes burning with renewed fury. But just as he was about to strike, a bright light erupted from behind him, filling the shop with a blinding radiance. Rachel shielded her eyes, and when the light faded, she found herself standing in an empty shop. The candy man was gone, his presence erased as though he had never existed. The shelves were empty, the jars of candy vanished, and the shop itself looked as though it had been abandoned for years. Outside, the town was waking up. The people who had been under the Candyman's spell began to stir, blinking in confusion as though emerging from a long, dark dream. The missing townspeople returned, wandering back into the streets with no memory of where they had been or what had happened to them. The spell was broken. Rachel knew that the danger wasn't truly gone. The Candyman might return someday, finding new ways to spread his dark influence. But for now, the town was safe, and the story of the Candyman would serve as a warning, a reminder of the power of greed, fear, and desire, and the strength it took to resist them. In the end, the Candyman was defeated not by magical violence, but by the simple act of standing up to him, of refusing to give in to the darkness he represented. And as long as people remembered that lesson, the Candyman would remain nothing more than a story, a ghost of the past that could no longer harm the living. But still the legend lives on, passed down from generation to generation, a story of horror, hope, and the eternal battle between light and darkness. And as long as there are those who hunger for power and wealth, who are tempted by the sweetest things in life, the Candyman will always be waiting in the shadows, ready to offer his cursed confections to those who are foolish enough to take them. So if you ever find yourself in a strange town and you come across a candy shop that seems too perfect, too inviting, be wary. The Candyman may be gone, but his influence lingers, and the temptation of his sweets is as strong as ever. And remember, once you've tasted his candy, there is no escape. The Candyman, a terrifying horror story. The legend of the Candyman continued to echo through the generations, a tale whispered among children who dared to venture near the old woods and among the elders who remembered the tragedies of the past. But as time passed and the world moved on, the stories began to fade into obscurity. The old fears were replaced by new ones, and the once vibrant warnings about the dangers of the Candyman became nothing more than ghost stories told around campfires. But the Candyman was not gone. His presence, though diminished, lingered in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge, to feed once more on the desires and fears of the living. In a distant, nondescript town far removed from the old cursed woods, life was peaceful and predictable. The residents went about their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the dark legacy that had been lying dormant for so long. The town was known for its quaint charm and close-knit community, where everyone knew each other, and nothing unusual ever happened. That all changed when a new shop appeared on the town's main street, seemingly overnight. It was a candy shop, its exterior decorated with colorful stripes and a whimsical sign that read, "Sweet Temptations." The windows were filled with enticing displays of candies in every shape, color, and flavor imaginable, each one more tempting than the last. The townspeople were immediately drawn to the shop. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, bright, cheerful, and overflowing with the most delicious-looking sweets. The owner, a tall, slender man with a charming smile and deep, piercing eyes, introduced himself as Mr. Grimm. He was friendly and engaging, quickly becoming a beloved figure in the community. Children flocked to Sweet Temptations after school, spending their allowances on treats that seemed almost magical in their perfection. The candies weren't just delicious, they were extraordinary, with flavors so intense and unique that they seemed otherworldly. Word of the shop spread quickly, and soon, people from neighboring towns began making the trip to experience the wonders of Sweet Temptations for themselves. But with the arrival of the shop, strange things began to happen in the town. It started with the children. Those who frequented the shop began to change, slowly at first, in ways that were easily dismissed. They became more withdrawn, more secretive, spending less time with their friends and more time alone, hoarding their candy as though it were a precious treasure. Their appetites for anything else dwindled, and they started to complain of vivid nightmares, dreams of wandering through endless corridors made of candy, where a shadowy figure with glowing eyes watched them from the darkness. As the days passed, the children's behavior grew more erratic. They became restless, easily agitated, and their once bright eyes took on a dull, vacant look. They spoke less and less, their minds consumed by thoughts of the candy they craved. Parents grew concerned, but there seemed to be no explanation for the sudden changes in their children. Then the disappearances began. One by one, the children who had become most obsessed with the sweets from Sweet Temptations started to vanish. They would go to bed at night and simply be gone by morning, their rooms undisturbed, as though they had vanished into thin air. Panic spread through the town as parents searched desperately for their missing children, but there were no clues, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest where they might have gone. The town was gripped by fear, and suspicion quickly turned to Mr. Grimm and his mysterious candy shop. Some of the elders in the town began to remember the old stories, the legends of the candy man who lured children away with his sweets, never to be seen again. They whispered among themselves, their voices trembling as they recalled the tales of how the candy man had been defeated long ago, but never truly destroyed. One by one, the children who had become most obsessed with the sweets from Sweet Temptations started to vanish. They would go to bed at night and simply be gone by morning, their rooms undisturbed, as though they had vanished into thin air. Panic spread through the town as parents searched desperately for their missing children, but there were no clues, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest where they might have gone. The town was gripped by fear, and suspicion quickly turned to Mr. Grimm and his mysterious candy shop. Some of the elders in the town began to remember the old stories, the legends of the candy man who lured children away with his sweets, never to be seen again. They whispered among themselves, their voices trembling as they recalled the tales of how the candy man had been defeated long ago, but never truly destroyed. Despite their fears, no one dared confront Mr. Grimm directly. He remained as charming and polite as ever, dismissing the growing suspicions with a wave of his hand and a warm, disarming smile. He insisted that his candy was made with only the finest ingredients, that there was nothing sinister about his shop. But the more he denied it, the more the townspeople grew uneasy. One night, a group of parents, driven by desperation and fear, decided to take matters into their own hands. They gathered outside Sweet Temptations after dark, determined to find out what was really going on. Armed with flashlights and their own growing sense of dread, they'd forced their way into the shop. Inside, the air was thick with the sweet scent of sugar, so strong that it was almost suffocating. The shelves, normally filled with bright, colorful candies, were now eerily empty, save for a few scattered wrappers and bits of candy dust. The shop was silent, save for the faint hum of a refrigerator in the back. The parents spread out, searching for any sign of their children. As they ventured deeper into the shop, they found a door at the back slightly ajar, leading down into a dark, narrow staircase. With their hearts pounding, they descended the stairs, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a dimly lit basement. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with jars of candy, but these were different from the ones upstairs. The candies inside were darker, more ominous, and they seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural light. In the center of the room stood Mr. Grimm, his back to the parents as he worked over a large, bubbling cauldron. The sweet smell of candy filled the air, but there was something else beneath it, something rancid and foul. One of the parents stepped forward, their voice trembling with anger and fear. "Where are our children?" they demanded. Mr. Grimm turned slowly, his face still calm, his eyes gleaming with that unnatural light. "Your children are safe," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "They are simply enjoying a different kind of sweetness." The parents looked at each other, confusion and horror in their eyes. "What do you mean?" one of them asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Grimm smiled, but it was not the warm, charming smile they were used to. It was cold, malevolent, and filled with a cruel amusement. "They are with me now," he said, "in a place where they will never want for anything. They are part of the candy itself." The parents recoiled in horror as they realized what he meant. The candies in the jars, the ones that pulsed with that strange light, they weren't just sweets. They were their children, transformed and trapped in a twisted, sugary prison. With a cry of rage, one of the parents lunged at Mr. Grimm, but he was too quick. With a flick of his wrist, the air around him shimmered, and the parent was thrown back, crashing into the shelves and sending jars of candy tumbling to the ground. Mr. Grimm stepped forward, his form beginning to change, shifting into something dark and monstrous. His eyes glowed brighter, and his smile widened into a grotesque grin. "You see," he said, his voice now a deep, rumbling growl, "I am the Candyman, and I will not be denied." The parents, terrified and outmatched, turned to flee, but the basement door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The Candyman advanced, his form now fully revealed, a creature of shadow and smoke, his body twisted and deformed, his hands ending in long claw-like fingers. Desperate to escape, the parents fought back with whatever they could find: broom handles, shards of glass, anything that might slow the Candyman down. But he was too powerful, and one by one, they fell to his relentless assault. As the last of the parents was cornered, the Candyman paused, savoring the fear in their eyes. "You should never have come here," he hissed. "You cannot stop me. You cannot escape me." But just as he was about to strike the final blow, a sudden light filled the room, bright and pure, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The Candyman recoiled, hissing in pain as the light drove him back. The parent, barely conscious, looked up to see a figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was an old woman, frail and bent with age, but her presence radiated strength and power. In her hand she held a small, glowing amulet, the same talisman that had once been used to defeat the Candyman so long ago. The old woman stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "You have no power here," she said, raising the talisman high. "Your reign ends now." The Candyman snarled, but he could not withstand the power of the talisman. The light grew brighter, filling the room with a searing brilliance that dissolved the shadows and banished the darkness. With a final, enraged scream, the Candyman was torn apart, his form disintegrating into nothingness. When the light faded, the basement was silent. The Candyman was gone, and the old woman, her strength spent, collapsed to the ground. The surviving parent rushed to her side, helping her up as they both stared at the now empty space where the Candyman had stood. The jars of candy were gone, replaced by piles of dust, and the sweet scent that had filled the air was gone, replaced by the cold, damp smell of the old basement. The parent helped the old woman back upstairs, where the first rays of dawn were beginning to break through the windows of the shop. The town was quiet, but there was a sense of relief in the air, as though a great weight had been lifted. In the days that followed, the shop known as Sweet Temptations was boarded up, and the townspeople began to recover from the horrors they had witnessed. The missing children were never found, but the town slowly began to heal, the memory of the Candyman fading once again into legend. But the talisman, once again used to defeat the Candyman, was kept safe, passed down from one guardian to the next, a reminder that the darkness was never truly gone. The old woman, who had wielded it with such power, passed away soon after, but not before entrusting the talisman to the care of the parent who had survived the ordeal. And so the story of the Candyman continues, a tale of horror and hope, of light and darkness, passed down through the generations as a warning to those who might be tempted by the sweetest of things. For as long as there are those who hunger for power and wealth, who are drawn to the allure of forbidden desires, the Candyman will always be waiting in the shadows, ready to offer his cursed confections to those who are foolish enough to take them. And once you've tasted his candy, there is no escape.